Eliza Moore stood in the doorway of her father's dying cabin, staring at the stranger who'd just offered to save her family for a price she'd pay with her entire life. Marriage. To a mountain man she'd never met. In 3 days. The creditors were coming at dawn, and her father's lungs rattled with each breath like stones in a tin cup. She had no money, no prospects, and no choice. But when Jonah Hale's eyes met hers, calm, unreadable, and far too intelligent for a simple trapper, Eliza felt the first cold whisper of doubt. Who was this man, really? If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. And if you believe she's making the right choice, or the worst mistake of her life, stay until the end. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The wind came down from the high peaks like a wolf searching for weakness, and it found plenty in the Moore cabin. It slipped through gaps in the chinked logs, rattled the oilcloth window coverings, and made the single lantern flame dance shadows across her father's gaunt face. Eliza Moore sat beside his cot, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water that had gone cold an hour ago, and tried not to count the days they had left. 4. Maybe 5 if the creditors were feeling generous. They wouldn't be. Eliza. Her father's voice was a whisper, thin as the blanket covering him. You should sleep. So should you. She pressed the cloth to his forehead, feeling the fever burn beneath his papery skin. Thomas Moore had been a strong man once, a freight hauler who could lift a barrel of nails with one arm and laugh while doing it. Now he couldn't sit up without help. The lung fever had taken him slowly, the way a hard winter takes a mountainside, stripping away everything until only bare rock remains. I'll sleep when I'm dead, he said, then coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Eliza's chest tighten. Which won't be long now. Don't. It's the truth. He caught her wrist with surprising strength. And we need to speak truth tonight, girl, before morning comes. Eliza looked away, toward the corner where their remaining possessions sat in 2 small crates. A week ago, there had been 6. She'd sold the rest in town, her mother's dishes, the good saw, the mule, and still come back with barely enough to buy flour and fat back. The money had disappeared into her father's medicine like water into sand. The creditors, Thomas said. Samuel Carrick came by yesterday while you were in town. Eliza's hand stilled. What did he want? What they all want, payment or the land. Her father's eyes, still sharp despite the fever, held hers. He gave us until Saturday, 3 days. After that, he's filing with the territorial court. Saturday. The word settled over Eliza like a stone. She'd known it was coming, had felt it approaching like a storm you can smell on the wind, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. How much, she asked, though she already knew the answer would be impossible. $240. Eliza closed her eyes. They had $11.30. She'd counted it twice that morning, spreading the worn bills and coins across the table as if arranging them differently might make them multiply. I'm sorry, Thomas's voice cracked. Your mother would have known what to do. She always knew. Mama would have told you to stop apologizing. Eliza squeezed his hand. You got sick. That's not a sin. Might as well be, when you can't afford to recover from it. He coughed again, turning his head to spit into the rag beside his cot. When he looked back, there was something new in his eyes, something that made Eliza's stomach clench. There might be a way. What way? A man came this morning after Carrick left. Thomas watched her carefully. He asked about you. The room seemed to grow colder. What kind of man? The marrying kind. Eliza stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. No. Eliza, no. She walked to the window, pulling back the oilcloth to stare out at the darkness. The high country spread below them in shades of black and deeper black, the pine forest climbing toward peaks she couldn't see but knew were there, watching. I won't be sold like livestock. It's not like that. Then what's it like? She turned and her father flinched at whatever he saw in her face. A stranger wants to marry a woman he's never met, and coincidentally, his proposal comes the same day we're told we have 3 days to pay or lose everything. What would you call it? Thomas pushed himself up on one elbow, the effort making him shake. I'd call it a chance. Maybe the only one we'll get. To do what? Trade one kind of debt for another? To survive. The word came out hard, and for a moment Eliza saw a flash of the man her father used to be, the one who'd carved a life out of this unforgiving country through sheer stubborn will. You think I want this? You think I want to send my daughter off with a man I've never met? But I'm dying, Eliza. And when I'm gone, you'll have nothing. No land, no money, no family. Winter's coming, and you'll be alone in a territory that eats people like you for breakfast. The truth of it hit Eliza like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, the debt, her father's illness, that she hadn't let herself think beyond it. But he was right. Even if they somehow scraped together the money, even if her father recovered, she was a 23-year-old woman with no prospects in a place where prospects were everything. No husband, no inheritance, no skills beyond keeping house and managing accounts that had nothing left to manage. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. Thomas sank back onto the cot, breathing hard. "His name is Jonah Hale. Mountain man. Trapper, mostly. Has a cabin up in the high country, past Elkhorn Pass." "Why does a mountain man need a wife?" "Same reason any man does, I expect. Company. Someone to keep house. Maybe he's tired of living alone." Her father paused. "He offered to settle our debts, all of them, in exchange for marriage." Eliza's throat went dry. "All of them?" "Every cent. And he'll leave you the land free and clear, in writing, so when I'm gone you'll have something. He was very specific about that." It was too much. No one did something like that without wanting something equally valuable in return. "What else?" "What do you mean?" "What else does he want? There has to be more." Thomas shook his head slowly. "He said he wanted a wife, that's all. Someone strong enough for mountain living. He'd heard you could read and write and manage numbers. Said those were rare qualities in the high country." "Heard from who?" "Didn't say." Eliza pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion and fear. A stranger offering to pay $240 for a wife he'd never seen was either desperate, dangerous, or lying. Possibly all three. "What does he look like?" she asked. "Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, needs cutting, beard, quiet type. Didn't say much beyond his business." "How old?" "Hard to say with mountain men. Somewhere between 30 and 40, I'd guess. Moves like a younger man, though. Strong." "Did he seem—" Eliza searched for the word. "Cruel?" "No." Her father's answer came quickly. "Cold, maybe. Careful. But not cruel. He looked at me like he was measuring timber, not like he was enjoying my suffering. That's something, at least." It was something, but not much. "When does he want an answer?" Eliza asked. "He's coming back tomorrow night. Said he'd give you until then to decide." Thomas reached for her hand. "I know what I'm asking, and if you say no, I'll understand. We'll find another way." They both knew there was no other way, but Eliza appreciated the lie. She sat down beside him again, holding his hand while the lantern burned lower and the wind howled outside like it was trying to claw its way in. Her father fell asleep eventually, his breathing rough and labored, and Eliza stared at the shadows on the wall and tried to imagine what kind of man paid a fortune for a stranger. The night stretched on, cold and endless, and by the time pale light began to seep through the oilcloth window, Eliza had made her decision. She would meet this Jonah Hale. She would look him in the eye and see what kind of devil she was bargaining with. And then she would do what she'd always done, whatever it took to survive. Jonah Hale arrived exactly when he said he would. Eliza heard his horse before she saw him, the steady clip of hooves on the rocky trail that led to their cabin. She was outside, splitting kindling with an axe that had seen better days, and she didn't stop when the rider came into view. Let him see what he was buying. A woman who worked. A woman who didn't have the luxury of stopping just because a man showed up. The horse was a good one, she noticed. A sturdy roan gelding with intelligent eyes and well-kept tack. The man riding it sat easy in the saddle, like someone who'd spent more of his life on horseback than off it. When he dismounted, Eliza got her first real look at him. Her father had been right about the basics. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired. But he'd missed things too. The way Jonah Hale moved with a deliberate economy of motion, nothing wasted. The quality of his clothes, worn but well made, better than what most trappers could afford. The fact that his hands, when he removed his gloves, were calloused but clean, nails trimmed, no grime under them. And his eyes, gray, like morning fog, and far too observant. "Miss Moore," he said. His voice was deep, quiet, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Not fully Western, but not Eastern either. Something in between. "Mr. Hale." Eliza drove the axe into the chopping block and wiped her hands on her apron. "You're punctual." "I try to be." He glanced at the cabin, then back at her. "How's your father?" "Dying. But you knew that already." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, at her bluntness. "I did. And you're here to profit from it. I'm here to offer a solution that benefits us both." He said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather. "Your father needs money for debts and medicine. You need security. I need a wife. It's a practical arrangement." "Practical." Eliza crossed her arms. "That's one word for it. What word would you use?" "Opportunistic." "Fair enough." Jonah didn't look offended. "But opportunism isn't the same as exploitation. I'm not asking you to do this for free. No, you're asking me to trade my entire future for it." "I'm offering to buy your freedom," he corrected. "There's a difference." Eliza laughed, sharp and bitter. "Freedom. That's what you call it when a woman has to marry a stranger to keep from starving? That's what I call it when the alternative is losing everything and facing winter alone." Jonah's voice remained level, but there was something underneath it now. Something that suggested he understood more than he was saying. "I'm not pretending this is a love match, Miss Moore. It's a business arrangement, but it's an honest one. I pay your debts, you get the land in writing, and you come with me as my wife. In exchange, I get someone who can read, write, manage a household, and won't break under hard conditions." How romantic. "I didn't offer romance. I offered survival." The bluntness of it was almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. "Why?" Eliza asked. "Why me? There are plenty of women looking for husbands in the territory. Women with dowries and family connections. Women who haven't spent the last year watching their father waste away while selling everything they own just to eat." Jonah was quiet for a moment, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. "Because those women would expect things I can't give. They'd expect society and calling cards and trips to Denver. They'd expect a husband who talks about his feelings and writes poetry." He paused. "I live in the high country, Miss Moore. Past Elkhorn Pass, in a valley most people don't know exists. It's isolated, hard, beautiful, but unforgiving. I need someone who won't wilt the first time we're snowed in for a month. Someone who understands that survival sometimes means doing things that aren't pleasant or fair. Someone desperate enough not to ask too many questions. Someone strong enough not to need pretty lies." Eliza held his gaze, looking for the trap. Because there had to be one. Men didn't offer this kind of help without expecting something in return, something they didn't say out loud. "I want to see it in writing," she said finally. "All of it. The debt payment, the land transfer to my name, the terms of the marriage. Everything. I have the papers with me." Jonah reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather document folder. "You can read them. Take your time. Ask questions." He handed her the folder and Eliza opened it carefully. Inside were 3 separate documents, written in clear legal language on good paper. The first was a promissory note to Samuel Carrick and the other creditors, listing every debt by name and amount, with Jonah Hale listed as guarantor. The second was a land deed transfer, putting the Moore property in Eliza's name exclusively, with language that protected it from marital claim. The third was a marriage contract. Eliza read that one twice. It was straightforward almost to the point of coldness. Jonah Hale agreed to provide housing, food, clothing, and basic necessities. Eliza Moore agreed to manage the household, maintain the property during his absences, and fulfill the customary duties of a wife. There was a clause about fidelity, both parties expected to honor it, and one about dissolution, should either party wish to end the arrangement after the first year. "After the first year I can leave?" Eliza looked up sharply. "If you want to." Jonah's expression didn't change. I'm not interested in keeping someone who wants to be elsewhere, but you'd leave with nothing except the land here. That's spelled out in Section 4. She checked. He was right. After 1 year, either party could dissolve the marriage, but Eliza would forfeit any claim to Jonah's property or assets. She'd get the moorland and whatever personal possessions she'd brought, nothing more. It was, she realized, exactly what he'd said. A business arrangement. What about children? She asked. What about them? The contract doesn't mention them. Jonah's jaw tightened slightly, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. If there are children, they'd be provided for. That goes without saying. Nothing goes without saying in a legal contract. Then I'll have it added. He pulled out a pencil and made a note on a separate paper. Children born of the marriage will be jointly supported, and any dissolution agreement will include provisions for their care and maintenance. Satisfied? Not particularly, but it's better than nothing. That's all this is, Jonah said quietly. Better than nothing, for both of us. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the careful, neutral expression to whatever was underneath. He was hiding something. She was certain of it. The quality of these documents, the precise legal language, the fact that he could produce $240 in cash, none of it fit with a simple mountain trapper. But did it matter? Whatever he was hiding, could it be worse than watching her father die knowing she'd failed him? Could it be worse than facing winter alone with nothing? I need to think about it, she said. Take until morning. I'll be at the hotel in town. Jonah swung back into his saddle with easy grace. If you decide yes, meet me there at dawn. We can be married by the circuit judge before noon and leave by evening. If you decide no, I'll settle your father's medical debts anyway. Not the land debts, I can't afford that without getting something in return, but enough to keep him comfortable for however long he has left. Eliza's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because dying is hard enough without worrying about money. Jonah gathered his reins. Think it over, Miss Moore, but don't take too long. The creditors won't wait, and neither will Winter. He rode away, and Eliza stood in the yard watching until he disappeared around the bend in the trail. Then she went inside to face her father. Thomas Moore was awake, sitting up with effort, when Eliza entered. He took one look at her face and sighed. You're going to say yes. I haven't decided yet. Yes, you have. You're just trying to convince yourself it's a choice. He coughed into his handkerchief, examined it, then tucked it away. What do you think of him? Eliza poured herself water from the pitcher, buying time. I think he's not what he pretends to be. How so? Those documents were drawn up by a real lawyer, good paper, precise language, proper witnesses. And the money, $240 in cash? That's more than most trappers see in 5 years. She sat down, turning the cup between her hands. He moves wrong too, talks wrong. There's education there, refinement. He's hiding something. Does it change anything? That was the question, wasn't it? Eliza thought about the contract, the careful provisions, the escape clause after a year. She thought about Jonah Hale's gray eyes and the way he'd offered to pay her father's medical debts, even if she said no. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe it makes it worse, or maybe it makes it better. I can't tell yet. Do you think he'll hurt you? No? The answer came quickly, from some instinct she couldn't name. I don't think he's cruel. Cold, yes. Guarded, but not cruel. That's more than some women get. It was true. Eliza had seen enough marriages in the territory to know that kindness was rare and cruelty common. A cold man who kept his word might be better than a warm man who broke it. If I go, she said slowly, you'll be here alone. I'll be dead before the month is out. Thomas said it matter-of-factly. We both know it. The question is whether I'll die knowing you're safe or knowing I left you with nothing. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, but it's the truth. Her father reached for her hand. Eliza, I'm not telling you what to do. You're a grown woman, smart as they come, smarter than me, that's certain. But I will say this. You've spent the last year sacrificing everything for me. Every possession we had, every hour of sleep, every scrap of food. You've given until there's nothing left to give. Maybe it's time to let someone give something to you. By marrying him. By accepting help, even if it comes in a strange package. Thomas squeezed her hand. I met your mother at a barn dance, took one look at her, and knew she was the one. It was romance and moonlight and everything folks write songs about, and I loved her every day until she died. But I've also seen arranged marriages where the couple barely spoke on their wedding day, and 20 years later they're finishing each other's sentences and holding hands like youngsters. Love comes in different shapes, girl. Sometimes it comes fast, and sometimes it grows slow. What matters is whether there's respect underneath it. And you think Jonah Hale will respect me? I think he's already showing you more respect than most men would, putting everything in writing and giving you a choice. Thomas lay back, exhausted. But that's just my opinion. Yours is the only one that matters. Eliza sat with him until he fell asleep, then walked outside to think. The sun was setting, painting the high peaks in shades of gold and crimson. The same peaks she'd looked at every day of her life. The same mountains that had given her family everything and taken it all away again. She thought about her mother, dead 3 years from fever. About her father, dying by inches in that cabin. About the land that had been in their family for 15 years, bought with blood and sweat and hope. She thought about Jonah Hale and his careful contract, his gray eyes, his offer to help even if she said no. And she thought about winter, coming down from those peaks like a hammer. By the time the stars came out, Eliza had made her decision. She went inside, lit the lantern, and pulled out her mother's writing desk, one of the last things she hadn't sold. Inside was good paper, a pen, and ink. She wrote carefully, checking her spelling twice. Mr. Hale, I accept your proposal. I will meet you at the hotel at dawn. I have 3 conditions. 1. The debt payment and land transfer must be completed before the marriage ceremony. 2. I want the clause about children added to the contract in writing before we sign. 3. I need 1 hour alone with my father after we're married, before we leave. If you agree to these terms, I will honor my side of the arrangement. Elizabeth Moore. She folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and addressed it to the hotel. In the morning, she'd give it to the boy who ran errands in town. Then she went to bed and didn't sleep at all. 1. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that made the high country look like something out of a painting. Eliza dressed in her best clothes, a wool dress her mother had made, carefully mended over the years. She pinned up her hair, packed her few belongings into a canvas bag, and said goodbye to her father. He was awake, lucid, and trying not to cry. You look like your mother, he said, touching her cheek. She'd be proud of you. She'd think I was crazy. Same thing sometimes. Thomas managed to smile. You be careful up there. And if he turns out to be wrong, if he hurts you or breaks his word, you come right back here. Land or no land, you come back. I will. Promise me. I promise. They held each other for a long moment, and then Eliza picked up her bag and walked out into the morning. The trail to town took an hour on foot. Eliza used the time to memorize everything, the way the light hit the aspens, the smell of pine and sage, the sound of water running over rocks. Her whole life had been lived within 10 miles of this spot. Now she was leaving it for a place she'd never seen, with a man she didn't know. The hotel was the largest building in town, 2 stories with a porch and glass windows. Jonah Hale was waiting on the porch, dressed in clean clothes with his beard trimmed. He looked more civilized than he had yesterday, but also more foreign. Miss Moore? He stood when he saw her. You got my response to your letter? I did. He'd sent a runner before dawn with a single-word reply. Agreed. The judge is waiting, so is the banker and the land office. Jonah gestured toward the street. We'll handle the legal matters first, as you requested. They walked together through town, not speaking. People watched from windows and doorways, their faces curious and hungry for gossip. Eliza kept her head high and ignored them. The banker's office came first. Jonah produced a stack of bills that made the banker's eyes widen, counted out the exact amount owed to each creditor, and signed promissory notes guaranteeing payment. The whole transaction took less than 20 minutes. The land office was next. Jonah signed the deed transfer, putting the Moore property in Eliza's name, had it witnessed and sealed, and handed her the papers without ceremony. It's yours, he said simply, free and clear. Eliza looked at the deed, her name written in legal script, with all the proper seals and signatures. For the first time in a year, something inside her chest loosened slightly. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen where you'll be living." The judge performed the ceremony in his office, with the banker and a clerk as witnesses. It took less than 5 minutes. Jonah Hale produced a ring, plain silver, unadorned, and slipped it onto Eliza's finger. It fit perfectly. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the judge said, sounding bored. "You may kiss if you like, but it's not required." Jonah looked at Eliza. She looked back. They shook hands instead. The judge rolled his eyes and handed them the marriage certificate. And just like that, Elizabeth Moore became Elizabeth Hale. They walked back to the hotel in silence. Eliza's mind felt strangely empty, like she'd used up all her thoughts and emotions and had nothing left. She was married, to a stranger. It had taken less than an hour to change her entire life. "I'll get our things ready," Jonah said when they reached the hotel. "You have an hour with your father, like we agreed. I'll meet you at the north end of town when you're ready." Eliza nodded and walked back to the cabin one last time. Her father was sitting up when she arrived, dressed in his best shirt. He looked at her hand, at the ring, and his eyes filled. "So you did it." "I did it." Eliza sat beside him and showed him the land deed. "It's in my name. You don't have to worry anymore." "I stopped worrying the moment you walked out that door." Thomas took her hand, examining the ring. "Simple. That's good. Man who chooses simple isn't trying to impress anyone." They talked for an hour, about her mother, about the old days, about nothing and everything. When it was time to go, Thomas held her tight and whispered, "You're stronger than you know. Don't forget that." "I won't." "And Eliza, if there's ever a chance for more than just survival, for happiness, real happiness, you take it. Don't settle for less just because less is what you started with." Eliza kissed his forehead and left before she could start crying. Jonah was waiting with 2 horses, his roan and a sturdy mare packed with supplies. He helped Eliza mount without comment, then swung onto his own horse. "It's a full day's ride," he said. "We'll camp tonight and reach the valley tomorrow. You know how to ride?" "Well enough." "Then let's go." They rode north into the high country, and Eliza didn't look back. The mountains rose around them like walls, and the trail grew steeper and narrower. Jonah rode ahead, silent and watchful, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about loose rocks. Eliza followed, her mind occupied with trying to remember everything: the shape of the passes, the placement of streams, the way the trail forked and twisted. If she needed to leave, she'd need to know the way back. By afternoon, they'd climbed above the tree line. The air grew thin and cold, and Eliza's lungs burned with each breath. Jonah noticed her struggling and slowed his pace. "We'll stop soon," he said. "There's a shelter up ahead." The shelter turned out to be a small stone cabin, barely larger than a shed, tucked against a cliff face. Jonah dismounted and helped Eliza down, then unsaddled the horses and led them to a lean-to built against the cabin's side. Inside the cabin was simple but well-maintained: a stone fireplace, a rough table, shelves stocked with basic supplies. Someone had been here recently. "I keep a few places like this," Jonah explained, building a fire, "for when the weather turns or I'm running a long trap line. This one's about halfway to the valley." "You come this way often?" "Once a month, usually, sometimes more if I'm bringing out furs." Eliza watched him work, noting the practiced efficiency. He moved like someone who'd built hundreds of fires, set up hundreds of camps. There was something almost hypnotic about it. "You can have the cot," Jonah said, nodding toward a narrow bed frame in the corner. "I'll sleep by the fire." "We're married. Won't people talk?" "There's no one up here to talk." He glanced at her, and for the first time something like humor flickered in those gray eyes. "But I appreciate the concern for my reputation." Despite everything, Eliza almost smiled. They ate in silence. Jerky, hardtack, coffee that tasted like boiled leather. Eliza was too tired to care. When the meal was finished, she lay down on the cot without undressing and fell asleep almost immediately. She woke once in the night, disoriented and cold. The fire had burned low, and Jonah was sitting beside it, cleaning a rifle with methodical care. He didn't look at her, but somehow she knew he was aware she was awake. "Go back to sleep," he said quietly. "Long day tomorrow." Eliza closed her eyes and drifted off to the soft sound of cloth on metal. When she woke again, it was dawn, and Jonah was already packing their gear. The second day's ride was harder than the first. They climbed higher, following trails that were barely visible, crossing streams that ran cold and fast over smooth stones. Jonah led them through passes Eliza would have sworn were impassable, and twice they had to dismount and lead the horses over terrain too steep for riding. But the country was beautiful in a way that made Eliza's chest ache. The peaks stretched out forever, crowned with snow that glittered like broken glass. Eagles circled overhead, their cries echoing off the rocks. The air smelled of pine and stone and something wild she couldn't name. "We're almost there," Jonah said around midday. "Just over this ridge." They climbed one more rise, the horses laboring, and then Eliza stopped breathing. Below them, hidden in a fold of the mountains, lay a valley that shouldn't exist. Green meadows, a river running silver through the center, stands of aspen and pine climbing the slopes. And in the middle of it all, where the meadow met the tree line, stood a lodge. Not a cabin, a lodge. 2 stories tall, built from massive logs with river stone chimneys at either end. Glass windows, real glass, more than Eliza had ever seen in one place. A wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, a smokehouse. What looked like a workshop. It was the kind of place wealthy men built for summer retreats. The kind of place that cost a fortune. "What?" Eliza's voice caught. "What is this?" Jonah was watching her carefully. "It's home. You're a trapper." "I am. Trappers don't live in places like that." "This one does." Jonah urged his horse forward. "Come on, I'll show you." They rode down into the valley, and with every step, Eliza's confusion grew. The meadow was cultivated, not wild. Someone had cleared rocks, dug irrigation channels, planted windbreaks. The buildings were all well-maintained, recently painted, with strong roofs and solid foundations. This wasn't a trapper's cabin. This was an estate. Jonah dismounted in front of the lodge and helped Eliza down. Her legs shook from 2 days of riding, but she barely noticed. She was too busy staring at the place she'd just agreed to live for the rest of her life. "I know you have questions," Jonah said, tying the horses. "I'll answer them, but first, let's get you inside and warm. Then we'll talk." He opened the door, and Eliza stepped into a world she'd never imagined. The main room was enormous, high ceilings with exposed beams, a fireplace large enough to stand in, furniture that looked comfortable and expensive. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more books than Eliza had seen outside of a library. Rugs covered the floor, thick and soft. Windows on 3 sides let in light that turned everything golden. "This is..." Eliza turned in a slow circle. "I don't understand." Jonah closed the door and removed his hat. "I told you I was a trapper. I didn't lie. But I'm other things too." "What other things?" "The kind that complicate everything." He crossed to the fireplace and began building a fire. "Sit down, please. This is going to take a while." Eliza sat, her mind racing. She'd married a stranger, yes, but now she realized the stranger was even stranger than she'd thought, and she was about to find out why. The fire caught quickly, flames climbing over the kindling with a hunger that matched the questions burning in Eliza's mind. She sat on the edge of a chair that was far too fine for a trapper's home, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Everything about this place screamed wealth, the kind of wealth that didn't belong in the high country, hidden away where no one could see it. Jonah straightened from the fireplace and turned to face her. In the firelight, his features looked sharper, older. The careful neutrality he'd worn like armor since they met had cracked slightly, revealing something underneath that Eliza couldn't quite read. "My full name is Jonah William Hale," he said quietly. "My father was Richard Hale. He owned Hale Timber, one of the largest logging operations in 3 territories. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Eliza had heard of Hale Timber. Everyone in Colorado had. The company owned forests from Wyoming to New Mexico, employed hundreds of men, and made the kind of money people whispered about in saloons. 5 years ago, there had been some kind of scandal involving the owner's death, legal battles, accusations of fraud. The details were murky, but the name had been in every newspaper for months. "You're that Hale," she said slowly. "I'm that Hale." Then why? Eliza gestured at the room, at him, at everything. "Why are you up here pretending to be a trapper? Why would you need to buy a wife when you could have any woman in Denver?" Jonah pulled a chair across from her and sat down heavily. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. "Because those women would want the heir to a timber fortune. They wouldn't want me." "What's the difference?" "Everything." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When my father died, he left the entire company to me, not to my uncle who'd run operations for 20 years, not to my Aunt Margaret who'd handled the finances. To me, his only legitimate son. The will was ironclad. Witnesses, lawyers, everything proper and legal. But I was 26 years old and had spent the previous 5 years working as a surveyor in the territories. I knew timber, knew land, knew how to manage men in the field. What I didn't know was society, politics, the kind of maneuvering that happens in boardrooms and ballrooms." Jonah's jaw tightened. "My aunt saw weakness. She challenged the will, claimed my father was mentally incompetent when he wrote it. When that failed, she tried to have me declared unfit to run the company, said I was too young, too inexperienced, too unstable." "Were you? Unstable?" "No. Inexperienced? Absolutely." He looked into the fire. "I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, signed contracts I should have read more carefully. Within 6 months, half the board wanted me removed. My aunt was feeding them lies, manipulating stock prices, turning my own employees against me. It was like drowning in quicksand. Every move I made to save myself just pulled me deeper." Eliza watched him carefully, seeing the truth beneath the words. This wasn't the cold, calculating man who'd proposed a business arrangement. This was someone who'd been hurt badly enough to hide from the world. "So you ran away," she said. "I walked away." Jonah's voice hardened. "There's a difference. I could have fought, could have spent years in courtrooms burning through money and destroying what my father built. Instead, I made a deal. I signed over operational control to a board of trustees, kept majority ownership, and agreed to stay out of company business for 10 years. In exchange, they stopped trying to destroy me. And came here. And came here." He gestured around the room. "My father bought this land 20 years ago. He loved the mountains, loved the idea of having a place away from everything. He started building this lodge but died before it was finished. I completed it, made it into something that's mine, not his, not the company's, just mine." The pieces were starting to fit together, but Eliza still didn't understand the most important part. "Why do you need a wife?" Jonah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the valley. "Because my aunt is still trying to take everything. The 10-year agreement has clauses, performance requirements, stability markers, personal conduct standards. One of them states that if I'm deemed morally unfit or living in a manner unbefitting the Hale name, the trustees can revoke my ownership entirely. Living alone in the mountains isn't immoral. No. But living with a string of women without benefit of marriage would be. So would fathering illegitimate children, or being seen in compromising situations with anyone who could damage the family reputation." He turned back to face her. "My aunt has people watching me. I know she does. They pose as hunters, trappers, surveyors. They follow me when I go to town, take note of who I talk to, what I buy, where I sleep. They're looking for anything they can use against me." "So you needed a wife to prove you're respectable." "I needed a wife to remove the target from my back." Jonah's expression was grim. "If I'm married to a decent woman, living quietly, causing no scandal, there's nothing my aunt can use. The agreement expires in 3 more years. If I can make it that long without her finding grounds to challenge my ownership, I'll have full control again. I can rebuild what she tried to destroy." Eliza processed this slowly. "You could have married anyone. Someone from a good family with connections. Someone who could help you politically. And risk marrying someone my aunt could manipulate? Someone who'd sell information about me for the right price?" Jonah shook his head. "I needed someone outside that world. Someone who had no reason to care about timber companies or society politics. Someone who'd keep her word because her word actually meant something."
Someone desperate enough to agree. Someone strong enough to survive it. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Eliza. I chose you because I thought you could handle the isolation and wouldn't ask questions I couldn't answer. But I also chose you because when I asked around about Thomas More's daughter, everyone said the same thing. She's honest, she's smart, and she doesn't break. Those are rare qualities anywhere. In the high country, they're worth more than gold. The compliment caught Eliza off guard. She'd expected manipulation or cold calculation, not something that sounded almost like respect. What happens if I tell someone? She asked. What happens if I write a letter to the newspapers explaining who you really are? Then my aunt wins. The trustees revoke my ownership. The company gets sold off piece by piece, and 300 men lose their jobs. Jonah's voice was level, but there was steel underneath. And you'd be a widow with a nice piece of land and a reputation as the woman who destroyed one of the territory's largest employers. People would remember that. It wasn't a threat exactly, just a statement of consequences. Eliza appreciated the honesty even as it unsettled her. I'm not going to tell anyone, she said. I gave my word when I signed that contract. I don't break my word. I know. That's why you're here. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Eliza's mind was racing, trying to understand everything she'd just learned. She'd married a man running from his own life, a man worth a fortune who lived like a hermit, a man who'd bought her cooperation with honesty and legal documents instead of pretty lies. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Specifically, not the contract language, the reality. Jonah considered this. I need you to be here, to keep this house running when I'm out on the trap lines or checking timber stands, to be visible when anyone comes through the valley so they can report back that Jonah Hale lives respectably with his wife. And I need you to be discreet. No letters that mention my real identity, no conversations with strangers that reveal too much. Can you do that? Yes. Even if it means lying sometimes? I can be quiet without lying. There's a difference. A ghost of a smile crossed Jonah's face. Fair enough. What about you? Eliza asked. What do I get besides room and board? What do you want? The question surprised her. No one had asked her what she wanted in longer than she could remember. Eliza thought about it carefully. I want to learn, she said slowly. Everything. How to survive up here, how to manage land, how to do more than just keep house. I want to be useful in ways that matter. And I want, she hesitated, then pushed forward. I want respect, not affection, not romance. I know that's not part of this arrangement, but respect. As a partner, not property. Jonah nodded slowly. I can give you that. All of it. This valley is 3,000 acres. I'll teach you every inch of it if you want. How to track game, read weather, identify timber quality. Everything I know about the land you can learn. And as for respect, he met her eyes squarely. You're already more honest than most people I've met in boardrooms. That earns respect in my book. Even though you bought me? I didn't buy you. I bought your cooperation. There's a difference. It was the second time he'd made that distinction, and Eliza found herself almost believing him. Show me the rest, she said, standing. If I'm going to live here, I should know what I'm working with. Jonah stood as well, and for the first time, something like relief crossed his features. All right, but fair warning, it's a lot to take in. He wasn't exaggerating. The lodge had 8 rooms on the main floor. The great room where they'd been talking, a kitchen that was larger than her entire childhood cabin, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a dining room with a table that could seat 12, and 4 other rooms Jonah used for storage and business. Upstairs were 6 bedrooms, each one spacious and well-furnished. You built all this yourself? Eliza asked, running her hand along a doorframe that had been fitted so precisely there were no gaps. My father started it. I finished it after he died. Took 3 years and more money than I want to think about, but I had good men helping, carpenters from the company who knew their trade. Jonah opened a door to reveal what was clearly his bedroom. Simple furniture, few personal items, everything neat and ordered. This is mine. You can have whichever of the other rooms you prefer. Eliza looked at him carefully. We're not sharing? Not unless you want to. The contract says we're married. It doesn't specify sleeping arrangements.
He said it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment. If that changes, it'll be because we both want it to, not because a piece of paper says so. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt like the first truly honest thing anyone had said to her about marriage. "I'll take the room at the end of the hall," Eliza said, "the one with windows facing east." "It's yours." They went back downstairs and Jonah showed her the kitchen. It was beautifully equipped, a large cast-iron stove, copper pots hanging from hooks, a pump that brought water directly inside from a spring, shelves lined with preserved foods, smoked meats, sacks of flour, and beans. "I'm not much of a cook," Jonah admitted. "I can make coffee and fry meat without burning it, but that's about the extent of my skills. If you can do better, I won't complain." "I can cook." Eliza examined the stores, mentally cataloging what was there. "This is well stocked. You planning for a siege?" "Planning for winter. Up here, we can get snowed in for weeks at a time, sometimes months. You need supplies to last." The reality of that settled over Eliza like cold water. Months. Alone with this man, cut off from everything and everyone she knew. Jonah must have seen something in her face because his expression softened slightly. "It's not prison. The weather usually breaks enough for short trips. And there are neighbors, after a fashion, prospectors, trappers, a few families who homestead in the lower valleys. They're spread out, but they exist. You won't be completely isolated." "But mostly," he agreed. "That's the price of hiding. Is it too high?" Eliza thought about her father's cabin, about creditors and dying by inches. She thought about the alternative, watching everything disappear while she stood helpless. "No," she said, "it's not too high." They spent the rest of the afternoon with Jonah showing her the property. The barn held 4 horses, all of them good stock. The smokehouse was full of venison and elk. The workshop contained tools Eliza had only seen in catalogs: saws, planers, lathes, everything needed for serious carpentry. "You make furniture?" she asked, examining a half-finished chair. "Sometimes. Keeps my hands busy when my mind gets too loud." Jonah picked up a piece of sandpaper and ran it absently over the chair's arm. "My father taught me. Said a man who couldn't work with his hands wasn't worth much, no matter how much money he had." Sounds like he was a good man. He was. Stubborn, demanding, impossible to please sometimes. But good. He believed in paying fair wages, treating workers with dignity. That's what got him killed. Eliza looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Jonah set down the sandpaper, his jaw tight. "There was an accident at one of the camps. Cutting cables snapped, killed 3 men. The foreman claimed it was bad luck, equipment failure. My father investigated and found out the cables had been replaced with inferior materials. Someone had pocketed the difference. When he threatened to file criminal charges, he had a heart attack. Very convenient timing." "You think someone killed him?" "I think someone made sure he stayed stressed enough that his heart gave out. My father had angered powerful people by insisting on safety standards and fair contracts. Dead men can't testify." Jonah's voice was flat, emotionless. "I could never prove it, but I know what I know." The pieces of Jonah Hale's life were getting darker with every revelation. Eliza found herself wondering what it cost a man to carry that kind of knowledge, that kind of anger, and still function day to day. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be. It was 5 years ago. I've made my peace with it." He moved toward the door. "Come on. I want to show you something before it gets dark." They walked across the meadow, following the river upstream. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and fish darted in the shallows. The valley stretched out around them, green and peaceful, rimmed by mountains that glowed in the late afternoon sun. Jonah led her to a spot where the river widened into a pool, surrounded by willows. "This is the best fishing in the valley. Trout, mostly. Some bass if you know where to look." "You fish?" "When I remember to. Usually I'm too busy." He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water, 3, 4, 5 jumps before it sank. "My father used to bring me here when I was young, before the company got too big, before everything became about money and power. We'd fish all day and talk about nothing important. Those were good times." It was the first time Eliza had heard real warmth in his voice. She studied his profile, trying to reconcile the cold businessman who'd proposed a marriage contract with this man who remembered fishing trips with his father. You miss him, she said, every day. Jonah turned to look at her. He would have liked you, I think. He always said the best partners were the ones who told you the truth, even when it hurt. You've got that quality. I don't know any other way to be. Most people do. They learn to lie so early they forget they're doing it. He started walking again, following the river. I spent 2 years in Denver society, watching people smile while they planned your destruction. After a while, even honest people started looking suspicious. It's hard to trust anyone when you've been betrayed that many times. Is that why you live alone? Partly. Also because I like the quiet. Jonah glanced at her. Does that bother you? The quiet? Eliza considered it. She'd grown up with silence. Her father wasn't a talkative man, and after her mother died, their cabin had been full of long, empty hours. No, I'm used to it. Good, because there's a lot of it up here. They walked back to the lodge as the sun touched the peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. Jonah built up the fire while Eliza explored the kitchen more thoroughly, taking inventory of what she had to work with. By the time she'd figured out the stove and put together a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, full darkness had fallen. They ate at the large dining table, which felt ridiculous for just 2 people. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with awareness. They were strangers sitting in a house together, bound by law and contract, but not by anything resembling familiarity. Tomorrow I'll teach you the property lines, Jonah said, breaking the quiet. Where the valley boundaries are, which trails lead where, how to read the landmarks. After that, we'll work on practical skills, shooting, riding, basic survival. The more you know, the safer you'll be. Safe from what? Animals, mostly. We've got bears, mountain lions, wolves. They usually avoid humans, but not always. And weather. Storms move in fast up here. You need to be able to recognize the signs, know when to head for shelter. He paused. And people. Not everyone who comes through this valley is friendly. Like your aunt's spies? Like anyone looking for something they can use. Information, supplies, opportunities. In the high country, desperation makes people dangerous. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. Eliza appreciated that. After dinner, she washed the dishes while Jonah worked at a desk in the corner of the great room, reviewing what looked like ledgers and maps. The domesticity of it was strange. Like playing house, except the house was real, and the man scratching notes by lamplight was worth a fortune he couldn't claim. When she finished cleaning, Eliza stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure what to do next. In her father's cabin, evening had meant mending or reading by poor light until exhaustion forced sleep. Here, there were books, comfortable chairs, good lamps. Too many options. You can read if you want, Jonah said without looking up. Or go to bed. You've had a long couple of days. What are you working on? Timber surveys. I still keep track of the company's holdings, even if I can't make decisions about them. Helps me know what's happening, where the best stands are, what they're planning. He made a note on the map. Also helps me sleep, knowing I understand what's mine even if I can't touch it yet. Eliza moved closer, looking at the detailed maps spread across the desk. They showed forests marked with different colors, notations about tree types and densities, projected yield calculations. You do this every night? Most nights. It's habit more than necessity at this point. He sat back, rubbing his eyes. You can ask questions if you want. About the company, about my family, about any of this. I'm done keeping secrets from you. Are you? Eliza pulled a chair over and sat down. Because it seems like there's a lot more you haven't told me. Jonah's mouth quirked, almost a smile. Fair point. What do you want to know? Your aunt, Margaret, what's she like? His expression darkened immediately. Brilliant, ruthless, charming when she wants to be. She can walk into a room and within an hour have everyone believing whatever she wants them to believe. My father never trusted her, but he kept her close because she was family and because she was useful. After he died, she showed her true colors. Does she know about this place? She knows I own property in the high country. She doesn't know where exactly or what it looks like. I've been very careful about that. Jonah tapped the map. This valley isn't on any public records. My father bought it through shell companies and intermediaries. Even the deed doesn't specify location, just acreage and general territory.
As far as Margaret knows, I live in a trapper's cabin somewhere in the mountains. But she's still watching. Always. She's patient. She'll wait years if she thinks it'll give her an advantage. His fingers drummed against the desk. That's why the marriage was necessary. It gives me legitimacy, stability. Makes it harder for her to claim I'm unfit. Eliza thought about this carefully. What happens when the 10 years are up? What's your plan? Reclaim operational control. Review every contract, every decision made in my absence. Fix what's broken. Remove the people who betrayed my father's vision. There was quiet intensity in his voice. And make sure Margaret never gets another chance to destroy what he built. That sounds like revenge. That sounds like justice. Jonah met her eyes. There's a difference. Eliza held his gaze, seeing the determination there. This wasn't a man who'd given up or moved on. This was a man biding his time, waiting for the moment he could strike back. She'd married someone planning a war 3 years in the future. What do you need me to do? She asked. When that time comes. Stay out of it. This is my fight, not yours. We're married. That makes it my fight whether I want it or not. Something shifted in Jonah's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. You don't owe me that. No, but I owe myself the right to know what I'm part of. Eliza leaned forward. You bought my cooperation, remember? That means I cooperate fully, not halfway. If there's a storm coming, I want to know about it before it hits. Jonah studied her for a long moment, and Eliza had the sense she was being evaluated, measured against some internal standard. Finally, he nodded. All right. When the time comes, I'll tell you everything. Until then, all I need is for you to be exactly what you are, my wife, living quietly in the mountains. Can you do that? I already said I could. I know, but I wanted to make sure you understood what it means. Months of isolation, limited contact with the outside world, a life that's about survival, not society. His voice softened slightly. It's a hard thing I'm asking, harder than I have any right to. Maybe. Eliza stood, suddenly exhausted. But I've lived through hard before. I'll manage. She went upstairs to the room she'd claimed, lit the lamp, and looked around. The bed was larger than anything she'd ever slept in, covered with quilts that looked handmade and expensive. A wardrobe stood against one wall, empty and waiting. A washstand with a porcelain basin. A window that would show her the sunrise if she woke early enough. It was more than she'd ever had, and somehow it felt lonelier than her father's dying cabin. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding since the ceremony. She'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Whatever happened next, whether Jonah Hale turned out to be trustworthy or dangerous, whether this valley became a home or a prison, she was committed. The contract had been signed, the vows spoken, the door closed behind her. For better or worse, she was in this now. Downstairs, she heard Jonah moving around, banking the fire, checking locks. The sounds of a man settling in for the night. Her husband, legally and binding, even if they were still strangers. Eliza lay down fully dressed, too tired to do more than pull a quilt over herself. Through the window, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever seen, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The silence was immense, broken only by the distant sound of the river and the whisper of wind through pine. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about her father, alone in that cabin, dying by inches. Tried not to wonder if she'd made the right choice or simply the only choice available. Tried not to feel the weight of the ring on her finger, unfamiliar and strange. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams about mountains that grew taller the more she climbed, always out of reach. When she woke, gray light was seeping through the window and someone was knocking on her door. Eliza? Jonah's voice, quiet and careful. Sun's up. Time to start learning. She sat up, disoriented, then remembered where she was, what she'd become. I'll be down in a minute, she called. Take your time. Coffee's ready when you are. His footsteps retreated down the hall, and Eliza stood, looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Same face, same brown hair coming loose from its pins, same gray eyes that had seen too much, too young. But something was different, some quality she couldn't name. She was Elizabeth Hale now, a different person in a different life. Time to find out what that meant.
Eliza descended the stairs to find Jonah already dressed and moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been awake for hours. The smell of coffee filled the great room, mixing with wood smoke and the clean scent of pine coming through an open window. Outside, the valley was caught in that perfect moment between night and full dawn, everything soft-edged and silver. "You sleep all right?" Jonah asked, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. Well enough. It was a lie, but a small one. She'd woken a dozen times, disoriented by unfamiliar sounds and the vast silence between them. "What's first?" "Property lines. I want you to know every boundary, every trail, every landmark between here and the high passes." He handed her a cup. "If something happens to me, you need to be able to navigate alone." The casual mention of his potential death should have been unsettling, but Eliza found it oddly practical. This was a man who planned for every contingency, even his own absence. They spent the morning walking the valley, Jonah pointing out markers: a lightning-struck pine, a rock formation shaped like a broken tooth, a creek bed that ran dry by midsummer. He showed her the trails that led to neighboring valleys, the ones that dead-ended at cliffs, the hidden paths only visible if you knew where to look. His knowledge of the land was absolute, detailed, the kind of understanding that came from years of careful observation. "You really have been up here a long time," Eliza said as they climbed toward a ridge that overlooked the entire valley. 3 years, long enough to know where every deer trail runs, where the best timber stands are, which slopes are safe in winter. Jonah paused at the ridgetop, catching his breath. "My father taught me that land reveals itself slowly. You have to pay attention, watch how it changes with seasons, learn its moods. Most people never do that. They just take what they want and move on." From the ridge, Eliza could see the full scope of what Jonah owned. The valley stretched below them like a green bowl, the lodge a small structure in the distance, the river a silver thread connecting it all. Beyond the valley rim, mountains rose in every direction, endless, magnificent, indifferent to human concerns. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's mine." There was fierce possession in Jonah's voice. "The one thing Margaret can't take from me, no matter how hard she tries. She doesn't even know it exists." They ate lunch on the ridge, bread, cheese, dried apples, and Jonah continued the lesson, teaching her how to read the sky for weather changes, how to identify edible plants, how to find water when the obvious sources ran dry. Eliza absorbed it all, her mind cataloging information the way it had once cataloged her father's dwindling finances. Survival was just another set of numbers to balance, resources to manage. By afternoon, they'd circled back toward the lodge, approaching from the north. Jonah was explaining something about seasonal grazing patterns when he stopped abruptly, his hand coming up in a gesture that meant silence. Eliza froze. "What is it?" "Smoke. Wrong direction for the lodge chimney." His eyes scanned the valley below. "Someone's here." They moved quickly but quietly through the trees, staying below the ridgeline. As they got closer to the lodge, Eliza saw what Jonah had spotted, a thin column of smoke rising from near the barn, and 3 horses tied outside, good stock with expensive tack. "Stay here," Jonah said, his voice low and hard. "Don't come down unless I call for you." "Who is it?" "I don't know yet, but anyone who walks onto my property without permission isn't here for friendly conversation." He checked the rifle he'd been carrying all day, then looked at her. "If shooting starts, you run north. Follow the creek bed to the high trail and keep going until you reach the Morrison place. Tell them Jonah Hale sent you and needs help. Understand?" Eliza's mouth went dry. "You think it's that serious?" "I think I don't take chances." His eyes held hers. "Promise me you'll run if I tell you to." "I promise." He nodded once, then moved down the slope with the same deliberate care he'd shown all day. Eliza watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 days married and already facing whatever threat Jonah had been hiding from. She crouched behind a boulder and waited. Jonah approached the lodge from the side, using the outbuildings for cover. When he was close enough, he called out, his voice carrying clear and cold across the yard. "This is private property. State your business or leave." Movement near the barn. 3 men emerged, and even from a distance, Eliza could tell they weren't ordinary travelers. Their clothes were too fine, their bearing too confident. These were men used to getting what they wanted. The one in front was older, maybe 50,
with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome before arrogance hardened it. He smiled when he saw Jonah, spreading his hands in a gesture of false friendliness. "Jonah Hale. Been a long time." Jonah's rifle didn't waver. "Not long enough, Richard. What do you want?" "Is that any way to greet your uncle?" The word hit Eliza like cold water. Uncle. That meant this was Richard Hale, the man Jonah had mentioned, the one who'd run operations before Jonah inherited everything, the one who'd sided with Margaret in trying to take it all away. "You're not my uncle by anything except bad luck," Jonah said flatly, "and you're trespassing. Leave." "Can't do that. We've come a long way to talk." Richard gestured to the two men flanking him, hired muscle from the look of them. "Heard an interesting rumor. Heard you got yourself married." Jonah went very still. "Where'd you hear that?" "Oh, word travels. Even up here in your little kingdom." Richard's smile widened. "Margaret was very interested when she found out. Sent me to verify the facts. See if it's true that Jonah Hale, heir to a timber fortune, has taken a wife without telling his family." "I don't have family. I have vultures waiting for me to die so they can pick my bones." Now, that's harsh." Richard took a step forward. Jonah's rifle came up slightly and he stopped. "We just want to meet her, make sure everything's proper and legal. You understand how it is. We have to protect the family interests." "The family interests?" Jonah's voice dripped contempt. "You mean making sure I haven't done anything you can use to challenge my ownership?" "Well, if you put it that way." Richard's false friendliness slipped, revealing something colder underneath.
The agreement you signed has clauses about moral fitness, remember? We need to make sure this marriage isn't just a sham to satisfy legal requirements. That would be fraud, Jonah. Grounds for immediate revocation. Eliza's stomach dropped. This was exactly what Jonah had warned her about. His family looking for any weakness, any crack in his armor they could exploit. "The marriage is legal," Jonah said. "Recorded with the territorial court, properly witnessed, fully binding. You want to see the certificate? I'll show it to you. Then you leave." "I want to see the bride." Richard looked around the yard, his gaze calculating. "Where is she? Or did you pay some woman to sign papers and disappear?" "She's in town, shopping." "In town?" Richard's tone suggested he didn't believe it for a second. "How convenient. You wouldn't mind if we waited for her to return then? Shouldn't take too long if she's just shopping." Jonah's jaw tightened. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he insisted they leave, it would look suspicious. If he let them wait, and Eliza didn't appear, it would prove Richard's accusation. And if Eliza showed herself, she'd be walking into exactly the kind of scrutiny Jonah had tried to protect her from. From her hiding spot, Eliza made a decision. She stood up, brushed off her skirt, and walked down the slope toward the lodge. Every step felt like walking toward a cliff edge, but she kept her spine straight and her face calm. If these men were looking for weakness, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. Jonah saw her first, his expression flashing through surprise to anger to resignation in the space of a heartbeat. By the time she reached the yard, he'd schooled his features back to neutral. "Eliza," he said quietly, "you didn't need to come down." "Yes, I did." She walked to his side, close enough that Richard and his men would see the wedding ring, see the way she stood next to Jonah without fear. "You must be family. I'm Elizabeth Hale." Richard's eyes swept over her, taking in her plain dress, her work-roughened hands, the lack of jewelry except for the simple band. Eliza saw the calculation in his gaze, saw him trying to figure out what angle she represented. "Mrs. Hale," he said, inclining his head slightly. "A pleasure. I'm Richard Hale, Jonah's uncle by marriage. These are my associates, Mr. Garrett and Mr. Stone." The two men behind him nodded but didn't speak. Hired muscle, definitely, the kind that smiled while breaking your fingers. "What brings you all the way up here, Shitsia?" Eliza asked, letting just enough ice into her tone to make it clear she knew this wasn't a social call. "Family business. We were concerned when we heard about the marriage. Jonah has been so isolated up here, we worried he might have been taken advantage of by someone looking to exploit his position." Richard's smile was all teeth. "But I can see you're a respectable woman, simple folk, honest, not the usual type who'd go after a wealthy man." The insult was wrapped in politeness, but Eliza heard it clearly. She was being dismissed as too low class to be a real threat. "I married Jonah because he asked me," she said calmly. not because of his position or his money. I didn't know about either until after we were married. That got Richard's attention. His eyes sharpened. You didn't know who he was? I knew he was a mountain man who needed a wife. That was enough. Fascinating. Richard circled slowly, looking at the lodge, the outbuildings, everything with appraising eyes. And how are you finding married life? Must be quite a change from whatever you were doing before. It's different, Eliza allowed. But I'm adaptable. I'm sure you are. Richard stopped his circling, facing them both. The thing is, Mrs. Hale, we have to ask some questions. Legal requirements, you understand. The Hale family has certain standards, and we need to make sure this marriage meets them. What kind of questions? Jonah's voice was dangerous. Simple ones. How you met, when you married, where you're living, whether this is a genuine marriage or just a legal arrangement designed to satisfy contract requirements. Richard pulled a folded paper from his coat. See, Margaret has concerns. She thinks you might be committing fraud, Jonah. And if you are, the trustees can void your ownership immediately. There's no fraud. We're legally married. We live together. That's all the contract requires. The contract requires a marriage appropriate to the Hale family standards, Richard corrected, which means we need to verify that this isn't just a business transaction with romantic language. Eliza felt Jonah tense beside her. This was the trap. They couldn't prove the marriage was real without revealing details that might expose Jonah's secrets, but if they refused to cooperate, Richard would claim they were hiding something. What exactly do you need to verify? Eliza asked, keeping her voice steady. Richard's smile returned. Well, for starters, we'd like to see your living arrangements. Make sure you're actually residing together as husband and wife, not just using this place as a convenient fiction. You want to search our house. I want to ensure everything is proper and legal, Mrs. Hale. Surely you understand the family's need to protect its interests. Jonah's hand tightened on his rifle. You're not coming inside. Then you're refusing to cooperate with a legitimate family inquiry. Richard's voice hardened. That's very interesting. Makes me wonder what you're hiding. The standoff stretched out, tense and dangerous. Eliza could feel the situation spiraling towards something ugly. Violence or legal action, neither of which would end well for Jonah. She made another decision. You can come inside, she said quietly. You can see that we live here together, that the marriage is real, but you do it respectfully, and you leave when you're satisfied. Agreed? Eliza, Jonah started. It's fine. She met his eyes, trying to communicate trust. We have nothing to hide. That wasn't quite true, but Richard didn't need to know that. Jonah held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded tersely. Fine. But they leave their guns outside. This is my home, and I don't allow armed strangers in it. Richard considered this, then shrugged. Fair enough. He and his men unbuckled their gun belts, hanging them on the fence. After you, Mrs. Hale. Eliza led them inside, acutely aware of 3 pairs of eyes taking in every detail. The great room with its comfortable furniture and extensive library. The kitchen with supplies that suggested 2 people living together. The dining table set for 2. Richard walked slowly through the main floor, opening doors, peering into rooms. His associates stayed close, their presence threatening even without weapons. When they reached the stairs, Richard looked at Jonah. Upstairs too? If you must. Jonah's voice was tight with controlled anger. They climbed to the 2nd floor. Richard made a show of examining each bedroom, lingering longest in Jonah's room and then in Eliza's. She saw him noting the separate sleeping arrangements, saw the calculation in his eyes. 2 bedrooms, he said slowly. Interesting choice for newlyweds. My wife prefers her own space, Jonah said flatly. That's her right. Of course, though it does raise questions about the nature of the marriage. Richard ran his hand along Eliza's dresser, examining the few personal items there. How long have you been married, Mrs. Hale? 3 days. 3 days. Richard's eyebrows rose. And you're already sleeping in separate rooms. That's quite progressive of you. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze calmly. My husband respects my wishes. I consider that a virtue, not a flaw. Undoubtedly. But it does make one wonder if this is truly a marriage or simply a legal arrangement with separate accommodations. Richard smiled unpleasantly. Margaret will be very interested in this detail.
Margaret can be interested in whatever she wants, Jonah said, moving to stand beside Eliza. It doesn't change the fact that we're legally married and living together. That satisfies the contract requirements. Does it? Richard pulled out the paper he'd been carrying earlier, unfolding it. Let me read you the relevant section. The party of the first part agrees to maintain personal conduct befitting the Hale family name, including but not limited to maintaining a stable household, avoiding public scandal, and demonstrating commitment to family values through appropriate domestic arrangements. The question, Jonah, is whether a marriage of convenience with separate bedrooms constitutes appropriate domestic arrangements. The question, Eliza said before Jonah could respond, is whether you're interpreting that clause in good faith or looking for any excuse to challenge it. Richard's attention snapped to her. Excuse me. You heard me. You're not here to verify a marriage. You're here looking for ammunition. Any detail, no matter how minor, that you can twist into evidence of fraud. Eliza crossed her arms. But the truth is simple. Jonah asked me to marry him. I agreed. We were married legally by a territorial judge with proper witnesses. We live together in this house. That's a real marriage by any reasonable definition. A marriage usually involves more than shared living space, Mrs. Hale. And that's our business, not yours. Eliza's voice was sharp. What happens between husband and wife isn't subject to family approval. The law says we're married. The contract says Jonah must maintain appropriate conduct. He's done both. The rest is none of your concern. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Richard's face. He'd expected a simple mountain woman he could intimidate or dismiss. Instead, he'd found someone willing to push back. Margaret won't see it that way, he said. Then Margaret can file her complaints with the trustees and let them decide. But unless you have actual evidence of fraud, not just inconvenient sleeping arrangements, you're wasting everyone's time. Richard studied her for a long moment, reassessing. You're more articulate than I expected. Where did you say you were from? I didn't. Educated? Enough to know when I'm being interrogated instead of interviewed. Eliza glanced at Jonah, then back at Richard. You've seen the house. You've seen that we live here together. You've verified the marriage is legal. What else do you need? I need to know if this is real or theater. It's real enough to satisfy the law. That should be sufficient. Richard's jaw tightened. He clearly didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he'd assumed would be easy to handle. He turned to Jonah, switching tactics. You understand Margaret will fight this. She'll claim the marriage is a sham, that you're using it to satisfy contract requirements while maintaining your isolated bachelor lifestyle. The trustees will listen to her. She's been very persuasive about your unfitness to run the company. Let her try. Jonah's voice was cold. I've satisfied every requirement of that agreement. I'm married, I'm living responsibly, and I'm causing no scandal. She has no grounds to challenge my ownership. She'll find grounds. She always does. Richard moved toward the stairs. You should know she's not just challenging your fitness anymore. She's building a case that you've been mismanaging company assets, that your absence has cost the business opportunities and profits. She's got board members ready to testify that you're incompetent by default because you refuse to engage. I'm not allowed to engage. That's the agreement I signed. An agreement you signed under duress, according to Margaret. She claims you were coerced by threats and manipulated when you were grieving your father. Richard descended the stairs, his associates following. The trustees are starting to listen. Another year, maybe less, and she might have enough support to void the whole arrangement. They reached the main floor and Richard headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back one more time. Here's some free advice, Jonah. This marriage might buy you time, but it won't stop Margaret. She's been planning this for 5 years, and she won't quit just because you found a wife. If anything, she'll work harder now, attack the marriage, attack your character, attack anything she can reach. He glanced at Eliza. Be careful, Mrs. Hale. You've married into a war you don't understand. People get hurt in wars, especially innocent bystanders. I'm not innocent, Eliza said quietly. And I'm not a bystander. Richard smiled thinly. We'll see. Give it a few months up here in isolation, facing whatever Margaret throws at you, and see if you still feel that way. He walked out, his men following. They collected their guns, mounted their horses, and rode away without looking back. Eliza and Jonah stood in the doorway watching until they disappeared around the bend in the trail.
Then Jonah turned to her, his face unreadable. You shouldn't have come down. Yes, I should have. They would have waited until dark if necessary, and it would have looked worse. Eliza walked back into the great room, her legs suddenly unsteady. Was I wrong? No. Jonah closed the door, his movements controlled but tense. You handled it better than I expected, better than I could have. But now they know about you. Margaret knows about you. That makes you a target. He ran a hand through his hair, the first time Eliza had seen him do anything approaching a nervous gesture. Richard wasn't lying about her being dangerous. She'll come after this marriage with everything she has. Let her. We're legally married. The contract is satisfied. Eliza sat down, trying to slow her racing heart. What can she actually do? Anything. Everything. Jonah paced to the window, staring out at the valley. She'll investigate your background, looking for anything scandalous. She'll claim you married me for money. She'll spread rumors about both of us, plant stories in newspapers, bribe judges to rule that the marriage is fraudulent. She's done worse for less. Then we fight back. With what? I'm stuck up here by choice and by contract. I have no allies in Denver, no one I can trust to stand against her. His hands clenched on the windowsill. And she knows it. That's why she's been so patient. She knows time favors her, not me. Eliza watched him, seeing the frustration and anger he usually kept so carefully controlled. For 3 days she'd been learning about the man she'd married. Now she was seeing the full weight of what he carried. 3 years, she said quietly. That's how long until the agreement expires. Can you survive that long? I've survived 3 already. 3 more shouldn't be impossible. But it'll be harder now, because of me. Jonah turned from the window, his expression softening slightly. No, it'll be harder because Margaret finally has something concrete to attack instead of vague accusations about my fitness. But that's not your fault. If anything, you might have just saved this marriage by refusing to let Richard intimidate you. I didn't save anything. I just didn't let them see me scared. That's the same thing in a fight like this. Jonah moved to sit across from her. I meant what I said before. This is my fight, not yours. You can walk away any time, especially now that you know what you're facing. The contract has the dissolution clause. 1 year and you're free. Eliza thought about that, about packing up, going back to her father's land, living out her life alone, about letting Jonah face Margaret's attacks without anyone standing beside him. No, she said. No. I gave my word when I signed that contract, and I don't break my word just because things get difficult. She met his eyes. Besides, I don't like being threatened. That man, Richard, tried to make me feel small, tried to convince me I didn't belong here. I'm not giving him the satisfaction of being right. Something like respect crossed Jonah's face. You're stubborn. So are you. We'll match well enough. For the first time since they'd met, Jonah almost smiled. A real smile, not the careful neutral expression he usually wore. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less guarded. All right then, he said. We stand together, but I need you to understand what that means. Margaret will come after you personally. She'll dig into your past, twist facts, create lies. She'll try to prove you're unfit to be a Hale. Can you handle that? I've got nothing to hide. My father died poor but honest. I worked hard and married a man who offered security. That's the truth. Let her try to make it ugly. Truth is truth. Truth is whatever people believe, especially when money's involved. But Jonah sounded less certain, like her conviction was affecting his own doubt. Still, if you're determined, I won't stop you. Just promise me one thing. What? If it gets too dangerous, if Margaret's attacks start threatening your safety or your future, you'll reconsider. You'll take the dissolution clause and get out. His voice was serious, urgent. I won't let you be destroyed because of my family's war. Eliza wanted to argue, but she saw the genuine concern in his eyes. This wasn't manipulation or cold calculation. This was something closer to protection. I promise, she said. If it becomes genuinely dangerous, I'll reconsider. But only then. Jonah nodded slowly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. 3 days married, and already they'd faced the first real threat. already been forced to present a united front against people who wanted to tear them apart. "Thank you," Jonah said quietly, "for backing me up with Richard, for not panicking or giving them anything they could use." "You're welcome. Though I have to ask, did I make it worse? The separate bedrooms?" "Maybe. Or maybe not." Jonah stood, moving to the fireplace. "Married couples have all kinds of arrangements. Richard will try to twist it, but the law doesn't require us to share a bed to be legally married. Margaret knows that. She's just hoping to find enough questionable details to build a larger case." "What happens now?" "Now we wait and see what she does next. She'll make her move, probably soon while the marriage is still new and easier to challenge." He prodded the fire with a poker, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "In the meantime, we keep living our lives. We make this place look like a real home, a real marriage. We give her nothing to use against us." "How do we do that?" Jonah glanced at her, something complicated in his expression. "We make it real. Not the feelings necessarily, but the appearance. We live together, work together, present ourselves as a married couple whenever anyone might be watching. Because from now on, someone is always watching." The thought sent a chill down Eliza's spine. She'd married to escape poverty and save her father. Now she was caught in something far more complex, a battle between powerful people where she was both pawn and player, where every action would be scrutinized for weakness. But she'd meant what she said. She wouldn't break her word, and she wouldn't give Margaret Hale the satisfaction of winning. "Then we'd better start practicing," Eliza said, standing. "If we're going to convince people this marriage is real, we should probably look like we can tolerate being in the same room together." Jonah's mouth quirked. "We managed that just fine with Richard." "That was easy. We had a common enemy." Eliza moved toward the kitchen. "The hard part is making it look real when no one's threatening us." "Fair point." Jonah followed her. "What do you suggest?" "We start with dinner. You sit, I'll cook. We'll try having an actual conversation. Like married people do." "I'm not much for conversation." "Neither am I. But we'd better learn, because if Margaret sends more people to investigate, they'll expect us to at least be able to talk to each other without looking like strangers." She was right, and they both knew it. So Jonah sat at the table while Eliza worked in the kitchen, and they talked. Awkwardly at first, then gradually, more naturally. About the valley, about weather patterns, about nothing particularly important. Learning how to be two people in the same space without the weight of contracts and threats pressing down on them. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was a beginning. And outside, the mountains stood silent watch, keeping their secrets, while somewhere in Denver a woman named Margaret plotted her next move in a war that had just claimed 2 more players. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by a rider who wouldn't meet Jonah's eyes, and left quickly enough to suggest he'd been paid well for his discretion. Eliza was in the garden she'd started behind the lodge, turning soil that had lain fallow for years, when she heard Jonah call her name. Something in his tone made her drop the spade and run. He was standing in the great room, holding a cream-colored envelope with an ornate seal. His face had gone carefully blank in the way she'd learned meant trouble. "What is it?" she asked. "An invitation." He handed it to her. "From Margaret." Eliza opened it carefully. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant. It read like poison wrapped in silk. "Mr. and Mrs. Jonah Hale are cordially invited to attend a reception in honor of the Hale Timber Company's 30th anniversary. The event will be held at the Brown Palace Hotel in Denver on the evening of October 15th. The Board of Trustees and all family members are expected to attend. Business attire required." Below that, in a different hand, was a postscript that made Eliza's stomach clench. "Jonah, the trustees have requested the pleasure of meeting your new bride. Given recent questions about the legitimacy of your marriage, I'm sure you understand the importance of both of you being present. Your absence would be most unfortunate. Regards, Margaret." "It's a trap," Eliza said quietly. "Of course it is." Jonah took the invitation back, staring at it like it might bite. "She's forcing us into public, into her territory, surrounded by her allies, where she can control the narrative. Can we refuse? Not without giving her exactly what she wants, evidence that we're hiding something, that the marriage isn't real enough to withstand scrutiny." He crumpled the invitation slightly, then smoothed it out again. If we don't go, she'll tell the trustees we refuse to present ourselves as a married couple. If we do go, she'll have us on display like specimens in a jar. Eliza moved to the window, looking out at the valley that had become familiar over the past weeks. She'd learned its rhythms, its moods, learned how to read the weather in the way clouds gathered over the peaks, how to find her way even in fog, how to tell the difference between elk tracks and deer. She'd learned to shoot Jonah's rifle with reasonable accuracy, to preserve food for winter, to manage the lodge's complex systems of water and heat. She'd learned how to live here, and slowly, carefully, she'd learned how to live with Jonah. They weren't comfortable exactly, but they'd found a rhythm. They worked together during the day, ate together at night, talked about safe subjects, land management, weather, the valley's wildlife. They'd stopped treating each other like strangers and started treating each other like partners in a shared enterprise. It wasn't marriage as most people understood it, but it was real in its own way. Now Margaret was threatening to drag them into a world where none of that would matter, where they'd be judged by standards they'd never agreed to meet. "What happens at these receptions?" Eliza asked. "Speeches, drinking, networking, everyone pretending to care about timber while they actually care about money and power." Jonah's voice was bitter. "My father hated them, said they were necessary evils. You had to show up, had to be seen, had to play the game, or risk being left out of important decisions." "So we go." "Eliza, we go," she repeated firmly. "Because if we don't, she wins without even fighting, and I'm not giving her that satisfaction." Jonah studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're walking into? These people will tear you apart. They'll judge everything, how you look, how you talk, where you're from. They'll smile while they destroy you. Let them try." Eliza turned from the window. "I've faced poverty, illness, death. I can face rich people with opinions. It's not the same. No, it's worse because they pretend to be civilized while they cut you down. But I'm not afraid of pretense." She crossed her arms. "Besides, what choice do we have? We can hide here forever and let Margaret win by default, or we can fight back. You said you wanted to reclaim what's yours in 3 years. Well, you can't do that if you let her take it away now." Something shifted in Jonah's expression, surprise mixed with what might have been pride. "When did you become so fierce?" "I've always been fierce. I just had no reason to show it before." Eliza picked up the invitation again, examining the details. "October 15th. That's 2 weeks away. We'll need to prepare." "Prepare how?" "You'll need to teach me how these people operate, what they expect, what they value, how they communicate. I can't walk in blind." She looked at him steadily. "And we'll need to look like we actually belong together, like a real couple, not two people playing roles." Jonah's jaw tightened. "That means sharing more than we have been, acting affectionate in public, making people believe this is a love match, not a business arrangement. I know what it means. Can you do that? Can you let me touch you, hold your hand, look at you like you matter?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Because if we're not convincing, Margaret will see through it immediately." Eliza considered this carefully. She'd signed a contract agreeing to be Jonah's wife in legal terms, but they'd maintained careful distance in every other way, sharing a house, but not a life. Now he was asking for something different, a performance of intimacy that would require trust she wasn't sure she'd built yet. But the alternative was failure, and Eliza had never been good at accepting failure. "I can do it," she said. "Can you?" "I don't know." Jonah's honesty surprised her. "I've spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation, avoiding people, avoiding judgment, avoiding the need to perform for an audience. I'm not sure I remember how." "Then we'll learn together." Eliza held out her hand. "Starting now. If we're going to convince people we're married, we should probably be able to stand next to each other without looking like we're about to bolt." Jonah looked at her offered hand for a long moment, then reached out and took it. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. Eliza felt the contact like an electric shock, not unpleasant, just startling in its intimacy. "See?" she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Not so terrible. Not terrible at all. Jonah's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a a small gesture that felt enormous. But holding hands in private is different from performing affection in front of people who want us to fail. Then we practice, every day until we leave. We practice being comfortable together, being affectionate, being the kind of couple that makes sense to outside observers. Eliza squeezed his hand. We have 2 weeks. That's enough time to become convincing liars. Or convincing partners. The distinction hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Eliza withdrew her hand carefully. We'll need clothes, she said, shifting to practical matters. I can't wear homespun to the Brown Palace Hotel, and you'll need proper business attire. I have suits in storage, probably moth-eaten by now, but they'll do. Jonah moved to a chest in the corner, opening it to reveal carefully wrapped garments. You'll need a dress, something appropriate for Denver society. I don't know what's appropriate for Denver society. Neither do I anymore. But I know someone who does. He pulled out a worn notebook, flipping through pages until he found what he wanted. Mrs. Catherine Morrison. She runs a dress shop in town, but she used to work as a seamstress for wealthy families in the city. She'll know what's expected. Can we trust her? She's been a good neighbor, never asked questions, never spread gossip. If we pay her well enough and explain the stakes, I think she'll help. They rode to town the next day, Eliza learning quickly that the journey she'd made once in exhaustion was easier with familiarity. Mrs. Morrison turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who took one look at Eliza and understood immediately what was needed. Denver society, she said, pursing her lips. That's a tall order for 2 weeks, but I've worked miracles before. She measured Eliza carefully, asking questions about the event, the expected attendance, the kind of impression they needed to make. When she understood the full situation, that this was a test disguised as a reception, that hostile eyes would be watching for any flaw, her expression hardened. They'll be looking for reasons to dismiss you, Mrs. Morrison said bluntly. Poor fit, wrong color, outdated style, anything they can use to prove you don't belong. So we'll give them nothing. Simple elegance, expensive fabric, perfect tailoring. You'll look like you were born to wealth, even if you weren't. She showed Eliza fashion plates from Denver newspapers, explaining the current trends. The consensus was for rich colors, modest necklines, careful ornamentation. Nothing too flashy, that would mark her as new money trying too hard. Nothing too plain, that would mark her as poverty pretending to elevation. Deep burgundy, Mrs. Morrison decided finally, with black lace under the collar and cuffs. It'll complement your coloring and suggest sophistication without ostentation. I'll need to order the fabric from Denver, which will cost... Cost doesn't matter, Jonah interrupted. Make it perfect. Mrs. Morrison nodded approvingly. I'll have it ready in 10 days. You'll need to come back for fittings. They rode back to the valley in thoughtful silence. When they reached the lodge, Jonah disappeared into his study, while Eliza returned to her garden, working the soil with methodical intensity. Physical labor helped her think, helped her process the enormity of what they were attempting. That evening, Jonah emerged with books, etiquette guides, business journals, social registers. He spread them across the dining table like battle plans. If you're going to survive Denver society, you need to understand how it works, he said. The hierarchies, the unspoken rules, the way people communicate through what they don't say as much as what they do. For the next week, they studied together. Eliza learned which fork to use for which course, how to make small talk without revealing too much, the art of the polite cut that let you end a conversation without giving offense. She learned the names of prominent families, their business interests, their social connections. She learned how to read a room, identify allies and enemies, navigate conversations that were really negotiations. Jonah proved to be a patient teacher, walking her through scenarios, correcting mistakes without condescension. And slowly, Eliza began to see the man he must have been before he fled to the mountains. Educated, articulate, capable of moving through society with practiced ease, even if he hated every moment of it. You're good at this, she said one evening after they'd practiced formal introductions for the 20th time. Why did you run away if you were good at it? Being good at something doesn't mean it doesn't destroy you. Jonah closed the etiquette guide he'd been reading from. I could play the game. I could smile and network and make the right alliances, but it felt like dying slowly, becoming someone I didn't recognize. Up here, I can be myself. Down there, I have to be what they expect. What do they expect? Someone they can control, someone who will play by their rules, accept their authority, let them make decisions about what's mine. His voice hardened. Someone weak enough to manipulate. Then we show them you're not that person. We show them we're not easy targets, Jonah corrected. There's a difference. If I come across too strong, too confident, they'll see it as arrogance that needs to be punished. If you seem too capable, too independent, they'll see it as proof you're not a proper wife. We need to walk a very narrow line, competent but not threatening, confident but not arrogant, united but not conspiratorial. It sounded exhausting. But Eliza was learning that most of life involved walking narrow lines between competing demands. The dress arrived with 3 days to spare, delivered by Mrs. Morrison herself, along with appropriate accessories, gloves, a small beaded purse, shoes that pinched but looked elegant. Eliza tried everything on while Mrs. Morrison made final adjustments, pinning and tucking until the fit was flawless. "You look like you belong," Mrs. Morrison said finally, stepping back to assess her work. "Like you were born to this." Eliza looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress transformed her, made her look sophisticated and polished in ways her normal clothes never had. But underneath the elegant fabric and careful tailoring, she was still the same person who'd sold her mother's dishes to buy medicine, who'd married a stranger to save her father. She just looked different on the outside. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly, "for everything." Mrs. Morrison squeezed her shoulder. "You give them hell, Mrs. Hale. Show those Denver snobs that mountain women have just as much spine as city ladies." They left for Denver the next morning, taking the long route down through the passes. Jonah had arranged rooms at a modest hotel, not the Brown Palace where the reception would be held, but close enough to be convenient. They arrived in late afternoon, and Eliza got her first real look at the city. It was bigger than she'd imagined, louder, more chaotic. Buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high, streets teemed with carriages and wagons. People rushed past in clothes that probably cost more than her father's entire cabin. The wealth was staggering, casual, taken for granted in ways that made her chest tight. This was the world Jonah had left behind. This was what Margaret was fighting to control. Their hotel room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds separated by a nightstand. They unpacked in silence, the weight of tomorrow's performance pressing down on them. Finally, Jonah spoke. "We should practice. One more time." They stood in the cramped space between the beds, and Jonah took her hand, then her waist, drawing her close in the approximation of the kind of casual intimacy married couples displayed in public. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to relax into the contact. "Look at me," Jonah said softly. "Not like I'm a stranger, like I'm someone you've chosen." Eliza met his eyes, seeing past the careful control to something more complicated underneath. Fear, maybe, or hope. She wasn't sure which. "Better," he murmured. "Now smile, just a little. Just like you're happy to be here with me." She tried. The smile felt fragile, uncertain, but it was there. "We can do this," Jonah said, more to himself than to her. "We can convince them." "We have to," Eliza replied. "There's no other choice." They practiced for another hour, walking arm in arm, sitting close together, the small touches and gestures that suggested comfort and affection. By the time they stopped, Eliza's nerves were raw, but her performance was convincing. She hoped it would be enough. The Brown Palace Hotel was more magnificent than anything Eliza had seen outside of photographs. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, carpets so thick they swallowed sound. People in evening dress moved through the lobby like exotic birds, their jewelry catching light and throwing it back in brilliant sparks. Jonah offered his arm, and Eliza took it, grateful for the support. They climbed the grand staircase to the ballroom where the reception was being held, and a uniformed attendant checked their names against a list. "Mr. and Mrs. Jonah Hale," the man announced as they entered. Every head in the room turned. Eliza felt the weight of those eyes like a physical pressure, assessing, judging, calculating. She kept her spine straight, her expression calm, her hand steady on Jonah's arm. They moved into the room together, and conversations resumed around them, quieter now, more speculative. A woman detached herself from a group near the windows and glided toward them. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with iron gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. Eliza knew immediately who she was, even before Jonah's arm tensed under her hand. Margaret Hale. "Jonah," Margaret said, her voice warm in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "How wonderful that you could join us. And this must be your bride. How delightful." She extended a hand to Eliza, who took it carefully. Margaret's grip was firm, brief, assessing. "Mrs. Hale," Eliza said evenly, "thank you for the invitation." "Oh, call me Margaret. We're family now, after all." The smile was perfect, practiced, completely hollow. "I've heard so much about you. Jonah's letters have been quite detailed." It was a lie. Jonah had sent no letters, but Eliza understood the game. Margaret was testing, probing for reactions. "Nothing too scandalous, I hope," Eliza replied lightly. "On the contrary, he described you as remarkably capable, managing that isolated valley all by yourself while he's out on his trap lines. It must be quite challenging." The implication was clear. Jonah was absent, Eliza was alone. The marriage was a sham. Eliza felt Jonah's arm tighten under her hand, but kept her own expression pleasant. "I enjoy the work. The valley is beautiful, and Jonah has been teaching me everything about the land. It's remarkable what you can learn when you have an excellent teacher." She looked at Jonah as she said it, letting warmth show in her expression. He returned the look, and for a moment, Eliza almost believed the affection was real. Margaret's smile thinned slightly. "How lovely! You must tell me all about your courtship. I'm fascinated by how you two met." "I'd be happy to," Eliza said, "but perhaps later? I'm sure you have other guests to attend to." It was a polite dismissal, and Margaret's eyes narrowed fractionally before she inclined her head. "Of course. We'll talk more over dinner. I've seated you at the family table, so we can all get better acquainted." She drifted away, and Jonah exhaled slowly. "You just made an enemy," he murmured. "I made her notice me. That's different." Eliza scanned the room, noting the clusters of men in expensive suits, women in glittering dresses. "Who else do I need to watch out for?" Jonah guided her through the crowd, pointing out key players. Board members who controlled voting shares, business rivals who'd love to see Hale Timber fail, society matrons who could make or break a reputation with a well-placed word. It was a minefield of competing interests and hidden agendas. Dinner was announced, and they found their seats at a table near the front. Margaret sat at the head, flanked by Richard and two other board members Eliza didn't recognize. The conversation flowed around neutral topics at first: the hotel's new renovations, recent weather patterns, Denver's growth. But Eliza felt the undercurrent of hostility, the careful positioning before the real attack began. It came during the third course. "So tell me, Mrs. Hale," one of the board members said, a heavy-set man named Thornton. "What did your family do? Before your marriage, I mean." "My father was a freight hauler," Eliza replied calmly. "Hard-working, honest man. He died shortly after Jonah and I married." "My condolences. And your mother?" "Died 3 years ago. Fever. Tragic." "And where did you receive your education?" The question sounded casual, but Eliza heard the trap beneath it. "At home, mostly. My mother taught me reading and arithmetic. My father taught me about land management and accounts." "No formal schooling?" Margaret's voice was silky. "How unusual." "Not so unusual in the territories," Eliza said. "Many people educate themselves when schools aren't available. It builds character." "I'm sure it does." Thornton dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "Still, it must be quite an adjustment, going from that background to managing a household of Jonah's complexity." "I manage well enough. Jonah has been very patient in teaching me what I need to know." "Has he?" Margaret leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly has he taught you? About the family business, for instance?" Eliza felt Jonah tense beside her, but kept her own voice level. "Enough to understand its importance. Timber is the foundation of building, after all. Without good lumber, structures fail. Without responsible management, forests disappear. It's about balance, taking what's needed while preserving what must remain." It was nearly a direct quote from one of Jonah's journals, and several board members looked surprised. Margaret's expression hardened. "Quite articulate for someone with no formal education," she observed. "My mother always said intelligence and education aren't the same thing. You can have one without the other. Eliza met Margaret's eyes steadily. Though having both is certainly ideal. The barb landed. Margaret's smile became glacial. Indeed. Tell me, how do you spend your days in that isolated valley? It must be terribly lonely when Jonah is away on his extended trap lines.
I keep busy. There's always work to be done, preserving food, maintaining the property, managing supplies, and I've started a library catalog. Jonah has an extensive collection, and I thought it should be properly organized. This was true. Eliza had spent several afternoons organizing Jonah's books, creating a system that made them easier to reference. But she'd also done it knowing that mentioning intellectual pursuits would complicate Margaret's narrative of her as an ignorant mountain woman. A library catalog, Richard repeated, sounding skeptical. You can read well enough for that? I can read Latin titles and understand technical forestry texts, Eliza said coolly. So yes, I managed the catalog well enough. She'd spent the past 2 weeks memorizing enough Latin phrases and forestry terminology to make the claim believable. The expressions around the table suggested it was working. These people had expected an easy target, and she was proving to be more difficult than anticipated. Margaret changed tactics. And children? Are you planning to start a family? The intimate question should have been inappropriate, but Margaret asked it sweetly, as if concerned. Eliza felt Jonah's hand find hers under the table, squeezing once in warning or support. We'll see what happens, Eliza replied. We've only been married a short time. Of course. Though at your age one shouldn't wait too long. How old are you, my dear? 23. Oh. Margaret's tone suggested this was older than ideal. Well, there's still time, I suppose, though mountain living can be quite harsh on women, ages them prematurely, I've heard. It was a direct attack on Eliza's appearance, her suitability, her worth. The table went quiet, everyone waiting to see how she'd respond. Eliza took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. Then she smiled, not pleasantly, but with an edge that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. I've found that hardship builds strength rather than taking it away, she said. My mother used to say that soft hands make weak foundations. I'd rather have the strength to build something lasting than the luxury of staying soft. She looked directly at Margaret as she said it, and the implication was clear. Margaret, with her wealth and society connections, was soft, breakable. Eliza was not. Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing naked fury underneath. Then she recovered, laughing as if Eliza had said something charming rather than challenging. How refreshing. Jonah, you found yourself quite a spirited wife. I have, Jonah said, his voice carrying an edge of warning. She's stronger than people expect. I'd advise not underestimating her. The rest of dinner passed in tense civility, conversations carefully neutral. But Eliza felt the shift in the room's dynamics. She'd stood up to Margaret publicly, and people had noticed. Some looked approving, others scandalized, but no one looked dismissive anymore. After dinner, there were speeches, board members praising the company's success, Margaret accepting accolades with false modesty. Then dancing, which Eliza had dreaded. But Jonah led her onto the floor with surprising grace, and they moved together in a waltz that felt almost natural. You did well, he murmured as they turned. Better than I expected. She hates me now. She hated you before. Now she also fears you a little. That's progress. Is it? Or did I just make everything worse? Jonah pulled her slightly closer, and Eliza realized with a start that she didn't mind. You showed everyone here that you're not a victim waiting to be manipulated. That makes you dangerous to Margaret's plans. Dangerous is good. Dangerous can also get you destroyed. Only if you're not careful. And you're very careful. His eyes held hers. Thank you. For fighting back. For not letting her win. We haven't won yet. No. But we haven't lost either. That's more than I had 3 weeks ago. They danced until the music ended, then separated as other guests approached to make introductions. Eliza found herself surrounded by society women asking questions that seemed friendly but felt like interrogations. Where had she bought her dress? Who did her hair? What did she think of Denver compared to mountain living? She answered carefully, revealing nothing that could be used against her, building a persona of quiet competence wrapped in appropriate femininity. It was exhausting, but she maintained the performance until finally, mercifully, the evening wound down. Margaret cornered them one last time as they prepared to leave. Before you go, I should mention the trustees have scheduled a formal review of Jonah's status next month.
They'll want to interview both of you, verify the marriage is legitimate, ensure all contract requirements are being met. Her smile was venomous. I'm sure you understand. Just a formality. Of course, Jonah said evenly. We'll make ourselves available. Wonderful. I'll have the details sent to your hotel. Margaret's gaze shifted to Eliza. It was lovely meeting you, my dear. I look forward to getting to know you better. Much better. They left the Brown Palace and walked through Denver's gaslit streets back to their hotel. Neither spoke until they were safely in their room with the door closed. Then Jonah sat down heavily on one of the beds and put his head in his hands. She's going to come after us with everything now, he said. The formal review, investigations into your background, attempts to prove the marriage is fraudulent. She'll hire investigators, bribe officials, manufacture evidence if she has to. Let her. Eliza sat beside him, bone-tired but strangely exhilarated. We'll face it, together. Jonah looked at her, something complicated in his expression. You really mean that, even knowing what's coming? I gave my word, and tonight proved something important. What? That I can stand beside you in the worst of it and not break. Eliza held his gaze. That we can face them together and not just survive, but fight back. That's worth something. It's worth everything, Jonah said quietly. Then, almost without seeming to think about it, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, intimate, nothing like the practiced touches they'd performed all evening. Eliza's breath caught. For a moment, they sat frozen, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could feel the warmth of his hand still hovering near her face. Then Jonah pulled back, standing abruptly. We should get some sleep. Long ride back tomorrow. Right. Of course. Eliza's voice sounded strange to her own ears. They prepared for bed in careful silence, changing behind screens, avoiding eye contact. But as Eliza lay in the darkness, listening to Jonah's breathing from the other bed, she realized something had shifted between them, something that went beyond contracts and performances. They'd faced Margaret together and survived. They'd protected each other, supported each other, fought as a unit rather than separate individuals. It still wasn't love, but it was beginning to feel like partnership. And partnership, Eliza was learning, might be worth more than she'd ever imagined. The mountains welcomed them back like old friends, the high passes sharp with early autumn cold, and the aspens already turning gold. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest as they climbed higher, leaving Denver's suffocating civility behind. The valley appeared below them in late afternoon light, unchanged and perfect, and for the first time since the reception, she could breathe fully. Jonah seemed to feel it too. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, and when they finally dismounted at the lodge, he stood for a long moment just looking at the place he'd built. I forgot how much I hate it down there, he said quietly. I know. Eliza unsaddled her mare, running her hands over the familiar leather. But we survived it. We did more than survive. You were magnificent. He turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, not just respect, but genuine admiration. The way you handled Margaret, the board members, all of them. You didn't just hold your ground. You won. We won, Eliza corrected. I couldn't have done it without knowing you were beside me. They stood in the yard as dusk gathered, and Eliza realized with a start that they were smiling at each other. Real smiles, not the practiced ones from Denver. Something had changed during those tense hours in the Brown Palace. Some barrier had cracked without either of them noticing. The next morning brought another letter, this one from the trustees. The formal review would be held in 3 weeks at the territorial courthouse. Both Jonah and Eliza were required to testify under oath about the nature of their marriage, their living arrangements, and their commitment to upholding the standards expected of the Hale family name. They'll ask intimate questions, Jonah said, reading through the document. About our relationship, our daily lives, whether we share a bed. They'll try to prove the marriage is fraudulent by demonstrating we don't live as actual spouses. Eliza felt heat rise in her face, but kept her voice steady. Then we need to decide what the truth is. What are we, actually? It was the question they'd been avoiding for weeks. Jonah set down the letter and looked at her directly. What do you want us to be? I don't know. Eliza moved to the window, staring out at the valley. When I married you, I thought I knew exactly what this was. A business arrangement, mutual benefit, nothing more. But after Denver, after fighting beside you, she trailed off, searching for words. It feels like more than that now, at least to me. The silence stretched, then Jonah spoke, his voice rough with something that might have been hope. It feels like more to me too. Eliza turned. Jonah was standing in the middle of the great room, his hands hanging loose at his sides, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I didn't expect this, he continued, didn't plan for it. I thought I could keep you at arm's length, maintain the distance, protect us both from complications. But somewhere between teaching you the property lines and watching you face down my aunt, something changed. He took a step toward her. You're not just my wife on paper anymore, Eliza. You're my partner, my ally, the person I trust most in this world, and I don't know what to do with that. Neither do I. Eliza's heart was hammering. I've never been good at trust, never had reason to be. But with you, she paused, gathering courage. With you, it feels different. Like maybe trust isn't weakness. Like maybe letting someone in doesn't mean losing myself. It doesn't, Jonah said quietly. You're still the strongest person I know. That hasn't changed. Then what has? Everything else. He closed the distance between them, stopping just close enough that Eliza could feel the warmth of him. I think we've been so focused on what we're not a love match, not a conventional marriage, not what society expects, that we haven't looked at what we actually are. What are we? Two people who chose each other when we had no other options, who've built something real out of necessity and survival, who've learned to stand together against people who want to tear us apart. His hand came up, hesitant, and Eliza found herself leaning into the touch when his fingers brushed her cheek. Maybe that's worth more than romance. Maybe that's worth building on. Eliza's breath caught. This wasn't the cold arrangement she'd signed up for, wasn't the distant partnership they'd maintained. This was something rawer, more honest, more terrifying. The review, she said, her voice unsteady. They'll ask if this is real, if we... She couldn't quite say the words. If we're actually married, in more than name. Jonah's thumb traced her jawline, gentle and sure. What do we tell them? The truth. Eliza met his eyes. Whatever that is. The truth is, I want this to be real, Jonah said. Not because of the contract or Margaret's attacks or any external pressure, but because you make me want to be someone other than the man hiding in the mountains. You make me want to fight for what's mine instead of just protecting it. And what's yours? Eliza asked, though she thought she knew the answer. You. The word was simple, absolute. If you'll have me, not as a business arrangement or a legal fiction, but as an actual husband, imperfect, complicated, carrying more baggage than any person should have to deal with. But yours, if you want that. Eliza thought about the choice she'd made in her father's dying cabin, the impossible decision between starvation and surrender. She'd chosen survival then, chosen the hardest path because it was the only one available. Now she was choosing again. But this time, it wasn't about survival. It was about something bigger, more precious, more dangerous. I want that, she whispered. I want you. Jonah's kiss was nothing like the practiced touches they'd performed in Denver. It was real, searching, full of months of tension and uncertainty finally breaking free. Eliza kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and hope and fierce determination that had kept her alive through poverty and loss and loneliness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. We should probably move your things into my room, he said, and Eliza laughed despite everything. Very romantic. I'm out of practice. But he was smiling, and Eliza realized she'd never seen him look this unguarded, this genuinely happy. They spent that evening moving Eliza's belongings down the hall, combining their separate spaces into something shared. It felt momentous and ordinary at the same time, Just two people deciding to build a life together, even if that decision came months after the wedding. That night, lying beside Jonah in the darkness, Eliza felt something settle into place. This was her choice. Freely made. Not forced by poverty or desperation, but chosen because she wanted it. Because partnership had become something more, and survival had transformed into actual living. The weeks before the review passed in a blur of preparation and growing intimacy. They studied together during the day, learning what questions to expect and how to answer honestly without revealing Jonah's vulnerabilities. At night, they learned each other, the careful, tentative exploration of two people building trust. One conversation, one touch, one shared silence at a time. Eliza discovered that Jonah talked in his sleep sometimes, fragments of dreams about his father and forests burning. She learned that he was gentler than his rough exterior suggested, that he noticed small things, when she was tired, when she needed space, when she needed closeness. She learned that his silences weren't coldness, but careful thought, that his reserve protected a heart that had been hurt badly enough to make hiding feel safer than honesty. And Jonah learned Eliza too. Learned that she was strongest when she was fighting for something beyond herself, that she carried grief for her parents like stones in her pockets, that she was terrified of being useless or burdensome. Learned that her fierce independence came from years of having no one to depend on, and that learning to depend on him was an act of courage, not weakness. By the time they rode back to Denver for the review, they weren't pretending anymore. The touches came naturally, the affection was real, and when they looked at each other, there was something in their eyes that even Margaret would have trouble dismissing as performance. The territorial courthouse was less grand than the Brown Palace, but no less intimidating. A panel of 5 trustees sat behind a raised desk, Margaret among them, her face a mask of pleasant neutrality that didn't reach her eyes. Richard stood to one side with 2 lawyers ready to challenge anything that didn't fit their narrative. Jonah and Eliza were sworn in separately. Jonah went first, answering questions about their courtship, the marriage, their living arrangements. He was calm, factual, revealing just enough to satisfy legal requirements without exposing personal details. Then it was Eliza's turn. The lead trustee, an elderly man named Bancroft, looked at her over his spectacles with the kind of skepticism that suggested he'd already made up his mind. Mrs. Halley, would you describe the circumstances under which you met your husband? Eliza took a breath and told the truth. About her father's illness, the debts, Jonah's proposal. She didn't hide that it had been a practical arrangement initially, but she also didn't hide how it had changed. So you married for financial security, Margaret said smoothly, cutting into the questioning. Not for affection or genuine partnership. I married for survival, Eliza corrected. Just like every woman who's ever accepted a proposal from a man she barely knew, because the alternative was starvation. The question isn't why I married Jonah. The question is whether the marriage has become something more than its origins. And it has. Has it? Richard stepped forward. You maintain separate bedrooms, do you not? We did initially, we don't anymore. Eliza met his gaze steadily. We needed time to build trust. Now we have it. Very convenient, changing your living arrangements just before this review. Margaret's tone dripped skepticism. We changed them because we wanted to, because the marriage stopped being a business arrangement and became a genuine partnership. Eliza looked at Jonah, letting the truth show in her face. I love my husband, not because he paid my father's debts, but because he's shown me what real partnership looks like. He's treated me with more respect and honesty than anyone in my life. If that's not a real marriage, I don't know what is. The words hung in the air. Eliza saw Jonah's expression shift. Surprise. Then something deeper, warmer. They'd never said the words before, had been circling around them carefully, afraid to make them real. Now they were real, said in public, under oath, impossible to take back. Margaret's mask cracked slightly. How touching. Though declarations of love are easy to manufacture when your financial future depends on them. Are they? Eliza stood, her patience finally breaking. Let me tell you what's easy, Mrs. Hale. What's easy is sitting in Denver manipulating people's lives without facing any real consequences. What's easy is using wealth and connections to destroy someone while pretending it's about family values and business interests. What's easy is attacking a marriage because you're afraid of what it represents,
that your nephew might actually build something stable enough to reclaim what you've been stealing from him for 5 years. How dare you? Margaret started, but Eliza cut her off. I dare because I've got nothing to lose except the truth, and the truth is this. You've been trying to break Jonah since his father died. You've challenged his inheritance, questioned his competence, isolated him from allies, and done everything possible to make him fail. And when he didn't fail, when he survived by building a life away from your influence, you decided to attack his marriage because it's the last card you have to play. The room had gone completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. But here's what you didn't count on, Eliza continued, her voice steady and clear. You didn't count on him finding someone who'd fight beside him instead of for him. Someone who understands that survival sometimes means doing hard things, making strategic choices, building strength in unexpected places. You thought I'd be easy to break because I came from poverty, but poverty taught me how to survive, and survival taught me how to fight. So if you want to challenge this marriage, go ahead. We'll face every investigation, every interrogation, every legal trick you throw at us, and we'll win, because unlike you, we're not pretending. She sat down, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Bancroft cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale makes an interesting point. This review was called to verify the legitimacy of the marriage, not to prosecute it. Unless there's actual evidence of fraud, not just speculation or convenient timing, I see no reason to continue. But the separate bedrooms, Richard started, are a private matter between husband and wife, Bancroft interrupted. Plenty of respectable couples maintain separate chambers for various reasons. That's not evidence of fraud, just evidence of personal preference that's since changed. Anything else? Margaret and Richard exchanged glances. They'd expected an easy target, expected Eliza to crumble under pressure. Instead, she'd turned the tables, made them look petty and vindictive in front of the entire panel. The trustees would like to review documentation, Margaret said finally, her voice tight. Marriage certificate, property deeds, witness statements, all available and already filed with the court, Jonah said, speaking for the first time since Eliza's outburst. We have nothing to hide, Margaret. We never did. The only fraud here is the one you've been perpetrating, claiming concern for family interests while you systematically loot my father's company for personal gain. That's slander. That's fact, and we both know it. Jonah stood, moving to stand beside Eliza. I've spent 3 years documenting every questionable contract, every suspicious transaction, every decision that benefited you personally at the company's expense. I've got ledgers, correspondence, witness statements from workers you thought would stay silent out of fear. I was going to wait until the 10-year agreement expired to use it, but if you want to push this fight now, we can have it now. He pulled a folder from his coat and placed it on the desk in front of Bancroft. Everything's in there. Evidence of embezzlement, contract fraud, misappropriation of company funds. Enough to bring criminal charges if the trustees choose to pursue them. Margaret's face had gone pale. You have no proof. I have 3 years of careful documentation. Names, dates, amounts, shell companies you created to siphon money, bribes to officials, threats to employees, all of it meticulously recorded. Jonah's voice was ice. I'm a surveyor by training, Margaret. I know how to document things properly. Bancroft was flipping through the folder, his expression growing darker with each page. The other trustees leaned in, reading over his shoulder. The silence stretched out, tense and electric. Finally, Bancroft looked up. This is quite serious. These allegations, if verified, would constitute grounds for immediate removal from the board and potential criminal prosecution. They're lies, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. They're documented facts, Jonah corrected. And I have witnesses willing to testify. Men you thought would stay silent because they needed their jobs. Turns out loyalty works both ways. They remembered my father treated them fairly, and they're willing to speak up now that they know I'm coming back. You can't come back, Richard said desperately. The agreement says I can't participate in company operations for 10 years. It says nothing about documenting malfeasance or reporting crimes. Jonah's smile was cold. I've been very careful to stay within the agreement's terms while preparing for the moment it expires. 2 more years, Margaret. That's all you have left, and then I'm taking back everything you stole. Margaret stood abruptly.
This review is a farce. The marriage is clearly fraudulent, arranged purely to satisfy contract requirements. The marriage is legally binding and personally committed, Bancroft interrupted. I've heard enough testimony to verify that. As for the other allegations, Mr. Hale has raised, those require separate investigation, but they have no bearing on the question at hand. Is the marriage legitimate? Based on the evidence and testimony, I rule that it is. He banged his gavel, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. This review is concluded. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, you're dismissed. Mrs. Margaret Hale, please remain. The board will need to discuss these financial allegations. Margaret's face was a mask of fury and fear. She looked at Jonah with pure hatred, and Eliza felt a cold chill run down her spine. They'd won this battle, but Margaret wasn't finished. People like her never were, but they could face that later. Together. Jonah took Eliza's hand, and they walked out of the courthouse into bright autumn sunshine. They didn't speak until they'd walked 3 blocks, putting distance between themselves and Margaret's rage. Then Jonah stopped, turning to face Eliza. "You love me," he said. "You said it under oath." "I did." Eliza's heart was still racing. "I meant it. Even though I come with enemies and baggage and a war that might last years? Even though," she squeezed his hand, "I didn't plan to fall in love with you, wasn't looking for it, didn't expect it. But somewhere between learning the valley and fighting beside you, it happened anyway, and I'm not sorry." Jonah pulled her close, right there on the street with people walking past and staring. "I love you too. Should have said it weeks ago, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd think it was manipulation or desperation or anything except the truth." "What's the truth?" "That you walked into my life when I'd given up on trusting anyone, and somehow you made me believe again. Not just in you, but in the possibility of building something real, instead of just hiding from what I'd lost." He kissed her forehead gently. "You're the bravest person I know, Eliza Hale. And I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." "You already deserve me. We deserve each other." Eliza rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "What happens now?" "Now we go home. Back to the valley, back to the life we're building. Margaret will fight. She'll appeal the ruling, launch investigations, try everything she can think of, but we'll face it together." "And in 2 years?" "In 2 years, I reclaim the company. I fix what's broken, remove the people who betrayed my father's vision, and build something worthy of his legacy." Jonah pulled back enough to see her face. "And I want you beside me for all of it. Not as decoration or political necessity, but as my actual partner. Someone who understands the business, who can help me make decisions, who won't let me become the kind of man who values power over people." "That's a lot of responsibility." "You can handle it. You've already proven that." He smiled. "Besides, you told me yourself. You wanted to learn everything, to be useful in ways that matter. Well, helping rebuild a company that employs 300 people and manages forests across 3 territories matters." Eliza thought about that. About going from poverty to partnership in one of the territory's most important businesses. About using everything she'd learned, about survival, about land, about fighting when the odds were against you, to build something that would last. "All right," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "Fair wages for workers, real safety standards, no cutting corners to save money if it puts people at risk. And the valley, our valley, stays protected. No logging there, ever." "Agreed on all counts." Jonah kissed her, quick and fierce. "Anything else?" "Yes. When we get home, we're expanding that garden. If I'm going to help run a timber empire, I need somewhere I can put my hands in dirt and remember where I came from." "Done. Though I reserve the right to help with the planting." "You hate gardening." "I love you more than I hate gardening. I'll manage." They rode back to the valley the next day, and this time the journey felt different. Not an escape, but a homecoming. The mountains rose around them like guardians. The aspens blazed gold and crimson, and when they finally crested the last ridge and saw the valley spread below them, Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. This was home. Not just a place she lived, but a place she'd chosen, a place she'd fought for, a place she'd built alongside someone who'd become infinitely more than a stranger with a contract. Over the following weeks, they fell into new rhythms. Working together during the day, Jonah teaching Eliza the intricacies of timber management, Eliza helping Jonah organize years of notes and observations into coherent business plans. At night, they talked about the future, about what they'd do when the 10 years expired, about the kind of company they wanted to build. Letters came from Denver. Margaret had appealed the review board's decision and been denied. An investigation into her financial dealings had been opened. 3 board members who'd supported her had quietly resigned. Richard had disappeared, reportedly fled to California to avoid questioning. The tide was turning. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the peaks, Eliza and Jonah sat on the lodge's porch watching the valley settle into twilight. The river ran silver below them, and smoke rose from the chimney in a straight column toward the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonah asked quietly. "Marrying me? Everything that came after?" Eliza thought about her father's cabin, about the choice she'd made when there seemed to be no choices left, about poverty and fear, and the desperate calculus of survival. "No," she said firmly. "I regret that circumstances forced my hand. I regret that I had to choose between starvation and surrender. But I don't regret choosing you. Even when it was just a contract, you gave me more respect and honesty than most women get from men they've known their whole lives. And now," she reached for his hand, "now you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, a future I never imagined possible. Why would I regret that? Because you deserve more than a man with enemies and a war to fight. I deserve exactly what I have, a partner who treats me as an equal, who values my strength instead of trying to diminish it, who's building something with me instead of for me." Eliza squeezed his hand. "Stop trying to convince me I made a mistake. I chose you. I keep choosing you. That's not going to change." Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box that made Eliza's breath catch. "I know we're already married," he said. "I know the ring I gave you was practical, simple, chosen in haste. But I wanted—" He opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the fading light and threw it back in brilliant sparks. "I wanted to give you something that represents what we've become, not what we started as, if you'll accept it." The ring was beautiful, a sapphire the color of deep water, flanked by small diamonds set in gold. It looked like something made for mountain royalty, for a woman who'd fought her way to standing and refused to apologize for it. It looked like something made for her. "It's perfect," Eliza whispered as Jonah slipped it onto her finger beside the simple silver band. "Thank you. Thank you. For taking a chance on a desperate man hiding in the mountains. For becoming someone I trust more than anyone. For loving me even when I made it difficult." He kissed her hand where both rings gleamed. "For choosing me every day, even when the choosing gets hard." "It's not hard," Eliza said truthfully. "It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They sat together as darkness fell completely and stars emerged overhead in impossible numbers. Somewhere in Denver, Margaret was probably plotting new attacks, finding new ways to challenge their legitimacy, their marriage, their right to exist outside her control. Let her plot. Let her scheme. Eliza and Jonah had something Margaret would never understand, a partnership forged in necessity but tempered into something far stronger. Love built on respect, trust earned through honesty, commitment chosen freely rather than forced by circumstance. 2 years from now, they'd walk back into that world together. They'd reclaim what had been stolen, rebuild what had been broken, create something worthy of the sacrifice that had brought them here. They'd face opposition and obstacles, setbacks and struggles. The fight wouldn't be easy, but they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. Inside the lodge, the fire crackled warm and welcoming. The library waited with its carefully cataloged books. The kitchen held supplies for the winter ahead. The bedroom held a life they'd built together, piece by careful piece. And in the valley beyond, 3,000 acres of protected land stood as testament to what could be built when 2 people chose each other fully. When survival transformed into living, when necessity became choice, when a contract became a covenant. Eliza had walked into this valley expecting to trade her freedom for security. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more valuable, a partner who saw her strength and matched it with his own. A home that was sanctuary and foundation both. A future that stretched out bright with possibility instead of narrow with desperation. She'd bought her freedom, yes, but in the process, she'd found something money could never purchase. She'd found herself. She'd found love. She'd found home. And she'd found that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most extraordinary outcomes if you're brave enough to see them through. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. The mountains stood eternal watch, and in a lodge hidden in a valley most people didn't know existed, two people who'd started as strangers built a fire against the coming winter and chose each other again as they would every day for the rest of their lives. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that, in the end, made all the difference.